He's Jim Browdy. I am Marjorie Egan. You are listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu will be with us a week from today here at the Boston Public Library. Good morning, Jim.
Did you vote?
Not yet.
Do you remember this election day?
Henry just reminded me. I have to.
Would you have known had he not?
No, I would not. No, I would not. It's terrible. You know, the local papers are gone. You don't get the issues of the day in my town. Did you vote already?
Apparently, I did.
Good for you, Jim. Good for you.
7 o'clock this morning. I didn't need Henry to remind me, Marjorie Egan. You know, but she will be voting this afternoon.
Absolutely. Right after the show, Jim.
A month ago today, actually, Hamas militants conducted an unprecedented attack on Israel, resulting in the deadliest single day for Jewish people since the days of the Holocaust. In the intervening weeks, Israel's laid siege to the Gaza Strip, killing more than 10,000 Palestinians, according to the local Ministry of Health, more than a third of whom reportedly are children. By some estimates, at least 1 million Palestinians in Gaza have been internally displaced, and of course, Hamas still holds more than 200 hostages, including many children. So we're opening up the lines to get your thoughts a month into this conflict, seemingly with no end in sight, at 877-301-8970 to call or text. Netanyahu's stated plan is for Israel to hold security control over Gaza once the fighting is over. He said that on ABC yesterday. It's unclear whether this will result in another full occupation of the region. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is growing. As you know, no fuel, limited food and water, a hospital system completely in crisis. The heads of several United Nations bodies have called for either a humanitarian ceasefire, as has the U.S., or, a humanitarian pause, or an outright ceasefire. The United States has not joined in that. 877-301-8970. You know, Margie and I both were watching Anderson Cooper last night, and this woman, a nurse, Emily Callahan, had just come back from Gaza. She's an American nurse. She was in Gaza during the attacks, working for that incredibly wonderful organization, Doctors Without Borders. Listen to her describing the conditions at Khan Yunis Training Center that's in South Gaza.
By the time we left there were 35,000 internally displaced people living alongside us. There were children with just massive burns down their faces, down their necks, all over their limbs. And because the hospitals are so overwhelmed, they are being discharged immediately after, and they're being discharged to these camps with no access to running water. There's 50,000 people at that camp now and 4 toilets. They're given 2 hours of water every 12 hours. And that's where we were living too.
How impressive was she?
She was amazing to listen to. It's worth looking it up online to see her. She talked about how she was in danger for her life because she was an American. Looks American. She's a blonde woman. She certainly wasn't Palestinian, and how she was protected by these Palestinians, actually, who made sure that she and some of her companions got through the border, the Rafah Gate into Egypt, and they were left behind, probably to die. Remember, she talked about how they figured if they just ate 700 calories per day, which is not very much, they'd be out of food in 2 days. Yeah. So I think that's one of the issues here. This is kind of a slow motion disaster where we're seeing it's been a month now, and you can't forget what Hamas did in those kibbutzes and the horrors and the sadism
not to mention the hostages, including a ton of kids.
Exactly.
On that same
children.
show was the father of that 8-year-old who thought his daughter had been killed and now has found out she's a hostage in some tunnel somewhere.
Yes, and that the 4-month-old and the 4-year-old, the little children is hostages. I mean, just disgusting. But on the other hand, we're watching this now, and I think to a lot of people's minds, even though I understand what the Israelis are saying, they don't want Hamas to get the food, they don't want Hamas to get the fuel, all that. It is difficult to watch in slow motion and thinking about people just sitting there waiting to die, particularly when they're children, and when they're children who are terribly injured, as this nurse just described, and there's no treatment for them because the hospitals are shutting down. I mean, I think that's what's really hard for people to watch?
Our number is 877-301-8970. The head of the UN called it a Gaza graveyard for children, after which the Israeli ambassador to the UN suggested that he should resign. There are horrors on both sides, and it appears that our influence, the United States influence, despite arming the Israelis and about to send billions more dollars, is quite limited because, well, here's what Netanyahu said last night, both about continuing to have some authority over Gaza if and when this is ever over, and he also responded to the question of a humanitarian pause, which our Secretary of State had proposed there and elsewhere. He was talking to ABC News' David Muir.
Well, there will be no ceasefire, general ceasefire in Gaza without the release of our hostages. As far as tactical little pauses, an hour here, an hour there, we've had them before. I suppose we'll check the circumstances in order to enable goods, humanitarian goods to come in, or our hostages, individual hostages to leave. But I don't think there's going to be a general ceasefire.
I have to say, there's as much pain by virtue of being able to see the interviews of a lot of families on the Israeli side, obviously far fewer interviews with families on the Gaza side. We spoke to Sami Nabulsi yesterday, who was representing the family from Medway, which just returned to Logan,
Yeah.
I think it was last night, and this incredible nurse. And as Marjorie said, you should really Google this and watch this.
Yeah, it's
Emily
worth
Callahan.
watching.
She is one impressive human being. I mean, it's unimaginably horrible.
And the other thing is, and then we'll get to the calls and texts at 877-301-8970. I don't understand, obviously, as I will preface this by saying I'm no military expert, but I think even regular people can say, how is there a military solution? Hamas, by some reports, has enough food, enough supplies to last for months in these tunnels underground. So I don't know how, and if their tunnels are underneath places like refugee camps and hospitals, I don't see how Israel gets them without getting these people. So it's just a huge disaster on both sides. 877-301-8970. How are you feeling about this? Are you paying attention to this? It's really difficult to see these pictures and hear these testimonies day after day after day. Daniel in Lexington, thank you for calling.
Hey, Daniel.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate you making time to have this discussion. The question that I had was with regards to the death toll. I see the numbers of Palestinian death tolls, but I don't know of what reporting has been given on the Israeli side after the initial attack. Do you have any?
I have heard very little. I think the numbers are fairly modest. I mean, after the initial 1,400 you're talking about.
Right.
I think the numbers are very modest after that.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, thank you, Daniel, for your call. I mean, modest after the 1,400, but as I said in the introduction to this, the greatest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. I mean,
right, and also, is people have pointed out, this isn't 9/11 for us, like in terms of even the numbers, it's way down compared to the population of the United States, but they were over there. Al Qaeda was far away from us. These were Israelis that are living next door to where Hamas is and continues to be. So how can you go back to your homes worrying about this could happen again, and with this level of atrocity and cruelty?
Do you see what in defense of the killing of civilians in an effort to get the leaders of Hamas, do you see what some Israeli leaders are now citing?
Pointing to us.
Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Fallujah.
Right, well,
it's a pretty hard thing to respond to, actually.
Right. Well, I think you could. I think you could explain some of that. I think we've gone over Nagasaki and Hiroshima many times. The Japanese weren't going to surrender. How many more American soldiers are you going to kill to take over Japan? I think that was the calculation.
I understand exactly
and
what
I can understand that.
Was.
And I think we did kill a lot of civilians in Afghanistan, and especially Iraq. We shouldn't even have been in Iraq. But I think that what's so horrible now is this is continuing every day. Do we have any idea, getting back to Daniel's question, he was mentioning do we have any idea how many Hamas leaders
Israel has been able to kill?
Well, they claim they got a big time leader in one of those airstrikes just the other day, but I have no idea. I don't know.
At the cost of, arguably, assuming the Ministry of Health is telling the truth on the Palestinian side,
how many
10,000 civilians.
How many times do we kill some big shot in Al-Qaeda? And the next day it was another big shot in Al-Qaeda. You know, it took us a long time to get the big shot, Osama bin Laden. That was years before we got him. Let's go to Susie in Framingham. Thank you for calling.
Hey there.
Hey, it's Suze.
Hi, Suze.
Sue, sorry.
There's horrors on both sides, but I'm really getting very tired of the so-called liberals who are using words like genocide against Israel, of all people. I'm trying to stay a bit calm about this, but Hamas perpetrated the terrorist attack a month ago. Hamas could release the hostages. Hamas could share their supplies. Egypt could open their border and let people in. My friends who are Egyptians say they don't want to open the borders because they don't want Hamas in their country. What's going on is terrible, but why is it that people are blaming Israel and pressuring Israel? Where's the pressure on Hamas? Where's the pressure from Egypt, Iran, and the Arab countries?
Well, I think most of the Arab countries have not put enough pressure on Hamas, but even if everything you said, Suze, is true, the fact remains that thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians have died. That's not in any way. This gets back to the discussion Marty and I had a day or two after this started. This is not an either-or kind of thing. It's a harsh show on both sides. It's unimaginable what happened to Israelis, not only those who were executed on October 7th, but when you hear the stories of kids and older people who are hostages, hopefully still alive, but under incredible conditions, and then you flip to the other side and you see whole families of dozens of people who were bombed into oblivion. I mean, it's so, again, you are right about countries in that part of the world doing more to rein in Hamas, but at least in my estimation, it doesn't undo the fact that we're seeing horrible, I'm not using the word genocide, believe me, but horrible killings that one would hope are not necessary to get to Hamas. But Suze, thank you for the call. Here is Mike Johnson this morning, the new speaker on Capitol Hill at a press event. Well, you'll hear what he had to say. Here he is.
House Republicans understand that this moment demands decisive action, and we insist that we cannot waste any more time getting Israel the aid that it desperately needs. As the Prime Minister Netanyahu said very clearly, this is a battle between light and darkness, between good and evil.
By the way, a prime minister is supported by a very small minority of the Israeli people. I didn't hear Mike Johnson. Did he say anything about the Palestinians who've been killed? I'm just curious to know.
Well,
if that matters to him.
He should also say, I mean, my blood pressure is not going to be able to take this guy for long. What he wants to do is take this money from the IRS so that it's not going to help.
Mike Johnson, right?
Yes, it's not going to help the deficit. It's not going to help our finances at all because, as many people have pointed out, one of the problems with the IRS is they don't have the firepower to go after really expensive, really wealthy Americans that are cheating on their taxes because those Americans can afford to get better lawyers than the IRS can. So what he would be doing was actually increasing the deficit by requiring that this money be paid for by a cut in the IRS budget. I'm not sure why it is that Republicans are so big on letting tax cheats get away with tax cheating.
Because who are the primary tax cheats?
People that are funding them?
Very well. I'm serious. I don't mean that facetiously. Very wealthy
rich people,
donors are the ones who,
yeah, but
with
rich
more
people
auditors,
donate to Democrats too, don't they?
Well, I don't think it's even close,
Okay.
actually.
Lisa in the car, thank you for calling.
Liza.
Oh, Liza in the car,
Hey,
sorry.
Liza.
Thanks a million. I'm just calling because I'm so I'm sad watching this. That's the word. I'm just so sad watching this. I'm born and raised in Ireland. My husband is Lebanese. We have family in Lebanon who are worried that Hezbollah are going to start.
Yeah.
And we also he has cousins in Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And we also have Israeli friends. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's rational people there. They don't want this. The average person, they don't want this. All we're seeing is these extreme fundamentalists on all sides, and they get the airtime. people want to live in peace. It seems the average person over there, in my opinion, and I'm not an expert, and it's just so sad that that this is happening. And I denounce. I feel like I have to preface that I do denounce terrorists. I grew up with it in Ireland. You know what I mean? It's just it's wrong, and it's just I don't have a solution, but it's just, and you can't get hold of people, and then you've got Israeli cabinet members who are just monsters. This again, extreme.
Well, you know that one of them was such a monster that Netanyahu actually dumped him the other day after he suggested that maybe a nuclear bomb should be dropped on Gaza.
He's the Minister of Heritage. Yeah, and then there's Itamar Ben-Gvir.
Yeah.
He's precious. He had the Cadillac thing from Itzhak Rabin's Cadillac when he was assassinated, and he toted that around. He's a minister. Like, he goes in. He's the one who went to Al-Aqsa. You don't just keep the peace there. It's tenuous, but just keep it.
Liza, thanks for the call.
Provocative, and it just go on. Thank you. For what
thank
you.
You voiced what I've been trying to say, but much better
well,
than
I think a lot of people are texting this, by the way. Here's another one from Don in Ipswich. When I see the dead or injured people being pulled out of the rubble in Gaza, it's like hell on earth. I have to limit how much I can watch the news because it just upsets me so much. But, we should say there is one positive thing.
Which is?
Well, the resurrection of the discussion of a two-state
except I was about to say, Charlie Sennett, who Liza said she's not an expert, and neither you nor am I. Charlie Sennett is. He lived there for a lot of years in that part of the world, in Jerusalem, and I think other places too. He said that the one thing that Hamas and Netanyahu have in common,
they don't want it,
is they want a two-state solution, which is the only solution.
But I would say Netanyahu's in big trouble. I mean,
but what does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, I don't think he's going to be elected again. I just don't think he can be elected.
The issue
again.
is not being. I don't think there's any chance he survives.
His right-wing government.
Yeah, but in the meantime, he's leading this government, and this is what's happening. Again, offhandedly, he says maybe an hour humanitarian pause. And with all due respect to Joe Biden, who I think has said a lot of the right things. We're the most important ally of Israel. I assume if Joe Biden got on the phone with Netanyahu and says there will be humanitarian pauses, not an hour here, an hour there, but in a structured fashion so that supplies can get to people who are this close to dying, then Netanyahu would have to say yes. You have no choice.
I think that's why there have been all these protests across the country with, no ceasefire, no vote signs by people who are supporting the civilians in Gaza, and Arab Americans saying that that's it for Joe Biden if he doesn't be more strongly and more forceful toward Israel.
Before we take a break, we've mentioned this Emily Callahan because you and I were so impressed last night, the Doctors Without Borders nurse. Did you hear what she also said she does when she wakes up every morning and she goes to bed every night?
Yeah, she texts her friends there to say, "Are you still alive?"
Yeah, her colleagues who are still in Gaza, most of whom are Palestinians, within Doctors Without Borders.
Who are pretty sure they're going to be dead soon, which is why she does it. Yeah, we're talking about a tough subject, but today does mark the month since the terrorist invasion of Israel by Hamas. The war is continuing between Israel and Hamas, and we want to know how you are dealing with this, what you think about it. A month later, the number 877-301-8970. You can call or reach us at that number. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browning, Marjorie Egan, live at the library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News, YouTube.com/GBH News. A week from today, Mayor Wu will join us for an hour of Ask the Mayor. I keep saying it's 11 to 12. It's been changed, right? It's 12:30, 1:30. 12:30 to 1:30. She'll be with us a week from today. If you're just tuning in, it's the 1 month anniversary of the executions perpetrated by Hamas against 1,400 plus Israelis. We're a month into this war. Thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent Palestinians have been killed in an effort on the part of Israel to kill leaders of Hamas. And we're getting your take on this horror show 1 month in at 877-301-8970.
And let's not forget, since Hamas reportedly has all these supplies and food and water and electricity, et cetera, in their tunnels, they could spread it around among their Palestinian civilians if they wanted to, and they're not.
Well, it's pretty clear they don't give a damn about the people either there. I don't mean that humorously. I mean, it's obvious that they don't give a damn about them. They don't. Let's go Dave in the car. Hey, Dave.
Hey, okay, so I told your screener, I want to hear more and more and more talk about Prime Minister Rabin, who was killed by a bloodthirsty group of terrorists.
Yeah.
By the way, Charlie Sennett
people-
spoke about that at great length yesterday on our show, but it's a good
Great,
point.
and you know what? I listen to you guys every day, and I didn't catch you yesterday.
Well, it's
Sorry
online.
about that.
No, it's fine. You can check it out online at gbhnews.org. But
But
go
he
ahead,
did
Dave.
because he was trying to
But
advocate.
It is the haters. It is the haters against the humanists. There are haters on both sides, but not many. But they're in control. Just like right now, the Russians and the Ukrainians could get along fine if Putin wasn't there. You have hateful people leading small groups of hateful people and destroying. I mean, I'm like your caller. Was it Lisa or Liza?
Liza, yeah.
How you pronounce?
Yeah.
I'm setting my hair on fire and my stomach is upset. There is no reason for this. It could have been done, and the man who did a tiny step to make it happen got assassinated by his own people, who are now, by the way, running that country.
Dave, I think you make excellent and important points. Thank you for calling in and making them. 877-301-8970 is the number.
Let's go to Sam from Gloucester. Thank you for calling.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, I'd like to respond to that woman who called Suze.
Yep.
They said that we shouldn't be putting the blame solely on Israel, which is absolutely true. But regardless of how you're looking at this, they're the people who are continuously bombing the Palestinian people, and they're under textbook collective punishment. It's shocking to me, and of course I condemn Hamas, right? But I don't think the Israeli response is acceptable in any way.
Well, a lot of world leaders, including the head of the UN, I guess, agrees with you in light of the fact that he is calling for a ceasefire. But as you know, the United States is a holdout on that front. What do you say to, I hate to quote Netanyahu, let's say a responsible Israeli leader, if we have a ceasefire that allows the vast majority of Hamas leadership to remain in place, to continue at an appropriate time for them to execute our people?
Well, what I say is that they're probably going to do that anyway, and the civilians are the main problem here. They're the people who are going to be dying in droves.
They are.
He attempts to kill the terrorists, and we don't even know for sure if that's even happening.
Well, that is another fine point. I'm with you, Sam, on that. I would like to know more about a couple of things. One, about how successful these efforts have been when they claim success, the Israelis, the IDF claiming success in terms of killing leaders of Hamas. I'd like to know more about that. And as we discussed yesterday with Charlie Sennett, I'd like to know more about what the rules of engagement are on the Israeli side in terms of the proportionality issue, how they make a determination that a Hamas leader target is worth the likely loss in civilian life. And as I learned from the New York Times, because we are supplying weapons to Israel under the Geneva Convention, we are required to get that information from the Israelis. Now, I don't know that that we have. Sam, thank you for the call. We appreciate it. 877-301-8897. I just wish I knew more about military strategy. I mean, I
don't think there is a military. Why do we think there's a military solution?
You
That
think
was what we talked
Hamas has
about.
to be exterminated? I do.
Yes, I do.
I do. Is that going to happen through a diplomatic? I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough to know.
I don't know either, but I think getting rid of these United States, and it's not, I don't know why it's going to work that well for Israelis.
You
I mean,
might be right.
look at what happened in Afghanistan. We went into Afghanistan. We were going to get rid of the Taliban. They were there for 20 years. All these soldiers maimed.
If you were an Israeli who, forget if you were unfortunate enough to be one whose loved one was one of the 14 who was executed, or one of the couple hundred who were being held hostages, I'm sure not under wonderful conditions, or you're just an Israeli who lives with great anxiety.
Hamas has to go.
Hamas has to go, right.
Hamas has to go. But I'm just not sure. Again, I mean, the Taliban came back. ISIS came back. It's going to be Hamas or some other group that's going to come back. I mean, that's kind of the problem here, I think.
So your thought is two-state solution, then work backwards? Is that what you're saying?
I don't have a solution.
Let's go.
All I know is that I think it is very, very difficult. It's a mess over there, and I think we've all been riveted by it and upset by it. And so I thought it would be a good thing to talk about. Do I have any solutions, Jim? No, I don't.
Rowan Framingham, thank you for calling. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I listened to Charlie Sennett yesterday, and I just had to call you. We had a daughter who lived in Israel. She was a dual citizen. Mm-hmm. We have she passed away about 10 years ago. We have many friends and family members who I text every day to see how they're doing. Mm. Many of them have died, have been injured, have been called up in the reserve. And I just don't know what an acceptable response or a proportional response should be. The Gazans are living above these tunnels, and possibly where the terrorists are being held captive. Hamas doesn't give a two hoots about them.
That is true.
And I just don't know why, Israel very graciously gave them time to leave. I don't know why Egypt won't take them. Where are the other Arabic countries offering them refuge? I am glued to the news, and I am sickened by it at the same time.
Well, I have to say, that last sentence, I am totally with you, Ro, and I'm sorry about people you have lost, but thanks for sharing your insight into this horrible situation. 877-301-8970 is our number.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm looking at the email, people are just beside themselves. I mean, no one has a great solution, but people are definitely beside themselves over this whole thing.
We have time for one more.
Jordan in the car, thank you for calling.
Jordan, welcome.
Hey guys, good to talk to you again.
You too, thank you.
I'm a lapsed Jew. I spent 3 summers in Israel. So I think over 3 months over the course of 3 years. Mm-hmm. Married to a lapsed Catholic. God bless their mother's soul. But, one of the things that I did while I spent summers in Israel was take a conflict resolution seminar. Mm-hmm. And the leader was incredibly well-spoken and spoke about the need to do 2 things in order to resolve conflict in general. 1 is always come from a place of agreement, and 2 is humanize everyone. Mm. And so, in this situation, when I look at what's going on and has continued to go on for so long, one thing is that I think we need to, first of all, when it comes to humanizing people, I am really frustrated with people interchanging Palestinians with Hamas.
I couldn't agree more.
They are not one and the same. We don't blame every single Russian for Putin's actions. We don't blame every single Israeli for Netanyahu's mess. So we need to really stop interchanging Hamas and Palestinians.
Jordan.
The Palestinians have not had a free and fair election since 2006. They do not want Hamas to control them, for the most part. The other thing that we need to do is recognize that Israelis and Palestinians don't want this. All of them want to live in peace. So there's your resolution. There is your place of agreement, and you go from there.
Jordan, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us, too. We appreciate it.
Well, maybe there'll be a more improved government in Israel after this, I hope.
But when is after this?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
I don't know. Suffer as a result.
Okay, we're going to change gears here. We're going to talk with NBC Sports' Trini Casey about something that really doesn't matter in the long run. The Patriots stink. I mean, that's basically the situation. And we're going to talk about how bad it's going to get, how long will Bill Belichick last, and after the Saudis invaded professional golf, apparently now they're invading professional tennis. Going to hear that as well. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Margery Egan live at the, where are we? The Boston Public Library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News, YouTube.com/GBH News. Mayor joins us. Mayor Wu joins us a week from today for an hour for your questions and ours, 12:30, 1:30. We're joined now, recently back from Italy, bearing gifts, I should say. Marjorie's upset that I'm holding the gift, and she's not.
Up my alley.
Anchor reporter for NBC Sports Boston and a BPR contributor. Welcome home, Trini Casey.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
It's nice to be home, I guess.
We're glad, and thanks for the gift.
Yeah, of course.
I'll share a couple with Marjorie.
Let's start with the New England Patriots. We'll play a little sound from the ever-cheerful head coach of the New England Patriots, Bill Belichick, speaking to reporters after the 17-20 loss in Week 9 of the very dismal season. Here he is.
Game where we had our chances. Had a chance here at the end, just couldn't make enough plays. And obviously had, plenty of opportunities along the way that we need to make more out of. So just a disappointing result. Just got to do a better job of making the plays when we have the opportunities to make them. It's as simple as that. So that's really about it.
There's nothing wrong with. No, by the way, that was not his usual rude,
No, he actually answered that.
Three-word answers. That was a grown-up kind of answer.
It was better than usual. So what's the deal? Can't get good receivers, can't get good defense, can't get a good quarterback, can't get.
I never thought I would see the day in this town where Bill Belichick would be asked at the podium, which he was yesterday, if he's worried about his job security.
That was incredible.
It's incredible. And they're not wrong. If this was any other coach, it would have been asked weeks ago, right? So yesterday he was asked if he's concerned about his job security. He said he's on to Indy. They're preparing for Indianapolis.
In Germany, right?
Yeah, they're playing Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Colts in Germany, Sunday morning at 9:30. And then he was asked a follow-up question. Props to the reporter who asked the follow-up. Do you think you're coaching for your job in Germany?
Good for them.
And he said again, I'm just preparing. I'm preparing for the Colts. I don't think, and most people who cover the Patriots on a day-to-day basis and know that organization inside and out, do not think that he is going to lose his job if they lose to the Colts in Germany. The only way, and I've sort of heard this from a couple different people, that maybe if something could happen, it would happen after during the bye week, which is after the game in Germany, and only if there was a blow-up. Right? If there was a very contentious argument between Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft about whatever is going on, and it gets to a point where the situation is no longer tenable. And listen, I know people are saying, how is the situation tenable at all? They're terrible. And And you can say what you want about Bill Belichick, the coach, but the numbers show that since Tom Brady left, this is not a good football team. They are under 500. They are underachieving, and he is the architect of the roster, and he has not put a roster on the field.
I have a critical question.
I want to know why.
Which side are the Italians on, Brady or Belichick?
I mean, I would assume that they're probably Brady.
Okay, fine. Go ahead, Margie.
Why, given that things weren't that great last year, did Bill Belichick get these multi-year contracts?
Because he's the greatest coach of all time, allegedly.
Well, yeah, but you would think things haven't been going so well, wouldn't you? Because they're going to have to pay him mega bucks.
Marjorie, I don't know. I don't know what the Crafts were thinking. And listen, these are all reports that came out while I was gone, that they gave Bill Belichick in the offseason a contract extension. The guy was already making. We don't know. That's the other thing. It's very shrouded in mystery. We don't know exactly what Bill Belichick makes, but we think it's somewhere in the ballpark of $25 million a year. Now, it has been reported since. Why are you guys laughing?
Nice.
Marjorie thinks that's a lot of money.
Boy.
Because
And it is a lot of. I mean, for a coach, that is like usually those kind of contracts go to like your star players, right? But here's the irony of it all: they won't pay star players that kind of money. They wouldn't pay Tom Brady what he was worth, and he walked away. They won't go after high-priced wide receivers. And so if you don't go after players on the field, a coach, it's obvious a coach can only do so much. And from what I understand, if the season continues to go on the trajectory it is going, and I don't see any reason that it's going to change, it doesn't matter that he signed an extension. They're going to start looking elsewhere.
Okay, I was going to make a comment about the quarterback, but I realized, really, why would you waste your time doing that? So I won't. So let me just say, I am disgusted by is it John Feinstein? Is that his name?
Yes, John Feinstein.
Huge sports writer.
Yeah.
Writes essentially a tribute to one of the most abusive, albeit successful, college basketball coaches, treated his players like crap if they ever made a mistake, treated reporters like crap, abused virtually anybody, and this is Bobby Knight, who died. And I generally don't do this,
posthumously.
I mean, but it is what it is. The guy was an abuser of other human beings, and because he was successful, in quotes, at winning games, we're supposed to say, well, there were two sides?
Let's play some sound to get people in the mood.
This is not even the worst. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Coach Bobby Knight. It's not the worst, but it's a little sound of him having no problem standing up to and cursing out reporters. Here's a clip from a 1994 speech to a crowd of Indiana Hoosiers, the fans actually, and how he'd like to be remembered. Here it is.
When my time on earth is gone and my activities here are past, I want they bury me upside down and my critics can kiss my...
Well,
that's
there you
very
go.
nice. That was very appealing.
Very classy.
I should say.
Yeah, I was surprised. So John Feinstein, who writes for the Washington Post, longtime columnist, he's written a ton of books. And one of the first books he ever wrote was about Bobby Knight. It was written during the 80s when the Indiana Hoosiers were at their pinnacle. They were, won a national championship under Bobby Knight. But even at that time...
Are they the last undefeated college champion in basketball?
Oh, that's a good question.
But they
Jim.
were undefeated in the 70s or 80s.
I believe so, yes.
But go ahead, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay.
I was just a kid then, Jim.
That's
sorry.
right.
Whatever. I don't remember those times. Right. I was watching
You weren't born
Scooby-Doo.
at those times.
She was a twinkle in her father's eye.
Yeah. But anyway, so Bobby Knight, I mean, he has a reputation of being a guy, right? Like what does everyone think of when they think of Bobby Knight? Taking the chair and throwing it down and throwing it at people and screaming and grabbing players and verbally abusing them. And John Feinstein talks about all of this in his column and how he basically writes a column of how it's hard. You look at Bobby Knight and he's like one of these figures that's hard to reconcile because on the one hand, he was wildly successful and at times he was a very endearing and charming human being, but he was also wildly abusive. Yeah. There's a story he tells, an anecdote where he's day in and day out with Bobby Knight and the Indiana Hoosiers in I think 85, 86.
When he was writing the book.
When he was writing the book.
Yeah.
And Bobby Knight, I don't know if he called him directly an anti-Semitic slur or just said it. And Feinstein didn't say anything to him at the time, but when they were in the car later, he said something to him about it. And Bobby Knight's response was, yeah, I hate when I say stupid things. It's someone who never really seemed to grasp the gravity of his words and the impact of his words. He was a tough guy to play for. He was a jerk. Really, he was, at the end of the day, the guy was a jerk.
We tend to idolize people who win things, even if they treat other human beings like crap.
Yeah, and he won a gold
I had-
medal in the Olympics. He coached at the collegiate
Okay,
level for 3 different
I have
schools.
one more
And
observation
was successful at all stops.
that I know is ridiculous, even before I say it. After I read the Bobby Knight thing, I was thinking about how you can idolize or rhapsodize over this guy, not you, not just Feinstein, tons of people after he died, greatest basketball coach, one of the greatest ever, all this sort of thing. Also, I was hearkening back to I watched the Commanders game, about half of it the other day, and I know he's not alone in this. I'm watching Bill Belichick scream at the top of his lungs at a referee, and I said to myself, is there any other profession other than pro sports
where you just
where
scream?
a management person can go to somebody they disagree with and start screaming at them at the top of their lungs like a 4-year-old? And I know the answer is going to be they all do it. Every coach at one point, but it's a problem.
Well, it's not just coaches either. Like think about how often, and this has been a knock, and the Celtics are playing great. They've lost for the first time last night. Jason Tatum is already having an MVP caliber year. But how often do we talk about Jason Tatum screaming at the refs? We see LeBron James do it where he, throws a temper tantrum and they get in these guys' faces. Sometimes they, and I know you can't touch them, and when you do actually bump a ref or touch them or say a certain thing, you get kicked out of the game. Same with a manager in baseball. But how often do we see there's just such a level of disrespect? I think what an athlete would say, well, it's in the heat of the battle and it's just part of the culture of the sport and we just yell and we scream. I mean, even Mac Jones on Sunday, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a play where we couldn't figure out if he was screaming at Tyquan Thornton, his teammate, or the referee. He said afterwards he was screaming at the referee. How often is he screaming at guys because something doesn't go his way, a call doesn't go their way? And listen, I understand there's a lot of money on the line. When if you're a good team and you advance deep into the postseason, every time you advance, your team gets a little bit more money, a little bit more money, a little bit more money. So there's more than just, and if you win a title, if you win a Super Bowl or an NBA title, there are huge bonuses attached to that for players that you get not just in your contract, but from the league. So I understand there's a lot of money at stake, but for whatever reason in sports, we've sort of, and sports talk radio too, we sort of just have this idea that it's okay to belittle people and yell at them in a way that is not acceptable in any other profession.
Exactly. By the way, let me just say in 10 seconds, I don't want to discuss it because we've got to move on. I actually feel bad for Mac Jones. He's not a superstar. They have dropped so many passes that were perfectly thrown by this guy. The fact that he takes to the podium afterwards and doesn't ever throw a teammate under the bus. He did?
He kind of does. He's just a little passive aggressive about it.
Like how?
What did he do?
Like this, well, a couple weeks ago, and this was early in the season, he talked about how, some of us are in here working, we're in early, we're in late. If everybody on the team did that. And then this weekend he was asked a question about receivers, not catching balls, not running correct routes. And the way that he said it to the reporter, it was Mike Giardi from the Boston Sports Journal, great reporter, longtime NFL guy. He looked at him and he said, that's a great point. As in, yeah, you're right. My guys aren't doing their job. I'm doing mine. They're not doing theirs. So he may not say, boy, so-and-so sucked out there today. But he does find a way to be like, yeah, good point.
Well,
buddy.
let me say
no one around me is doing what they're supposed to do.
Even though I screwed that up, I will not screw this up. I wish we had sound. I didn't think to ask our coworkers. The guy that dropped the pass at the end of the game.
Juju Smith-Schuster.
Right, that was right in his hands, took to the microphone and said the truth. I lost the game. I should have caught that. If I caught that, we would have at least kicked a field goal and it would have gone into overtime. I love when a guy who's making whatever he's making, egomaniacal, like the vast majority of them are, takes to a mic and says, I screwed up. And it's on me. I think that's just
full circle. If Bill Belichick wasn't a cranky old man who doesn't like anyone to ever push back at him, and he just would have kept Jacoby Myers on the team.
That's a very good point.
Maybe Jacoby Myers would have caught that pass on Sunday, and Juju Smith-Schuster wouldn't be here anyway, who is an aging wide receiver with a knee issue who has not even come close to living up to his expectations.
We're talking to Trenny Casey.
It all reminds me of that great day, well, not so great day, actually, because the Patriots lost the New York Giants, when Giselle Bundchen after the game said, my husband can't throw the ball and catch the ball at the same
She
time.
said he can't throw the ball and catch the effing ball
The
at
effing
the
ball.
same time.
That's right.
what
That's
she
right.
said.
She
That
did
was
use
great.
a swear word. Those were the days.
Those were the
Giselle,
days.
Tom, and all those Super Bowl rings. But let's move on. As everybody knows, this horrible mass shooting up in Lewiston, Maine, just a few days back, 18 people killed, 13 people wounded. It was heartwarming to read this story about the Lewiston-Auburn football game. What happened?
This article, like, it brought. I was tearing up reading it. So it's a natural rivalry football game. But it happened, of course, right after the shooting. And I mean, think about being a high school player, right? I'm sure that many of those kids, small town, knew people who were affected, whether they knew someone who died or someone who knew someone who died, and they have to go out and play a football game. And the place, I have chills. James Taylor sang the national anthem.
Good for him.
He was their New England native, obviously. It was like the most people that had ever shown up for the game, but it brought the community together. And I know a lot of times on this show we talk about football and the dangers around it and the head trauma and all of the bad things about sports, right? But there are times, I think, when sports brings people and communities together. Like, this was an opportunity for a rivalry to come together and both sides to support each other. And at halftime, Lewiston was losing the game. And I think they had won last year, and I think they're sort of on a trajectory to go to the playoffs. And the captains of the team looked around and said, we have to pull it together. We have to win for this town. And they did. They went out and they won the game. But it was to listen to not listen, but to read the quotes from the coach and the players and the people who were at the game, like what it meant for this community to come together and not have to think about tragedy for a second. It just was really heartwarming. And the idea that high schoolers shouldered a lot of that, like they're just kids, and they shouldered a lot of that pain and that grief.
I love the description when they talk about players and coaches on both teams lined up as a cavalcade of first responders, hospital workers, and other people involved in the aftermath of that horror lined up. A police honor guard led the line of first responders, some of whom walked with family members who lost relatives or had relatives injured. One officer walked with a police dog, bleachers packed with fans dressed in the school's blue and white colors, stomping their feet, clanging cowbells, whistling, cheering, and clapping as one of the coaches, I think,
Who wrote that, by the way? We should credit
Deanna Pan.
At the Globe.
She's a great reporter, great writer, too.
And I know I did send this story because I think I read it while, right after it happened. But one other sporting thing that had a tie to Lewiston was how the deaf bowling community has really come together. And that's been really,
4 people were killed of the 18.
Right. And, that was something that one of the victims loved and did every night. And sports is usually an escape from things. But how, again, they've come together to honor some of these victims through sport is just really touching.
Okay, could you explain to us John Henry's latest venture through the Fenway, whatever it's called, sports group?
Yes.
Is a team
golf league
video. What
virtual,
is it?
partially virtual.
Well, what is it exactly?
I don't really totally understand it, but from what I get, it's going to be a team golf league. So you have 4 golfers, and the only reason I'm like psyched about this is because I think it's really cool that Rory McIlroy chose to play for Boston. He chose to play for the Boston Commons. That's the name of the golf league.
That's pretty good.
From what I understand, this is a way to, one, with Live Golf, taking off in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi thing. This is a way for these guys to play something similar, make more money, and drum up more interest in the golf off season.
But do they ever play against anybody else? Or do they play on video? You don't know either.
It's partially video and then some in person, but it's like virtual. But that's like a thing now. Like this, have you ever been to like a Top Golf for a 5-iron, which is over? Remember the old wax museum over by City Hall?
No.
Okay, you guys didn't visit the wax. Okay, there used to be a wax museum by City Hall.
I've been to Madame Tussauds somewhere.
Yes,
that was Madame Tussauds?
Okay, no, there's a Madame Tussauds. It looks over City Hall. There's now this gigantic place called 5-iron, and you go and you play virtual golf.
You do?
And people do it. It's packed on the weekends. I've gone before because it was like raining all summer.
Oh, of course.
And you go and you play virtual 18 holes of golf, and it's a way for you to golf in the non-golf season, but people are really into it.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Okay, so
it's a team format, and you play against other teams from other
Sure you
major
do.
cities, and it's started by Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy.
Tiger Woods involved in this?
Tiger
Yes.
Woods and Rory McIlroy. This is their venture. It is really a direct response, I think, to LIV. It is
Okay.
a way for the PGA players to come together to
Okay.
play team something, which is how they do it in LIV Golf, right? Like LIV Golf is not 4 days of golf; it's 3 days.
We
It's
don't
more of
care
a
how they
team
do it.
So are
format.
you going to watch this on your phone?
No,
or
you watch
your
it on TV.
computer,
It's gonna,
TV?
you'll be able to watch it
Whatever.
on
Can I
TV.
transition?
The first match is at SoFi Stadium.
Okay,
so they'll
fine.
play like in a big stadium. So they'll play like
Sure they
virtual golf in a stadium.
Okay, no one cares. Let me just
We
say.
do care.
No, we
I
don't.
do.
We
I
don't.
do
You know what we
too.
care
I'm
about?
See, lady
Say
in the
what
front
you-
row.
Yeah,
into
care.
it.
that's right.
It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Okay.
Doesn't I think it seems cool.
Let me just say this.
There you go.
Excuse me, we're almost out of time. Speaking of Tiger Woods, say what you will about Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods turned down $1 billion
I know.
plus
To go to LIV.
from the murderous Saudi
Yes.
leadership.
Well, he's probably got enough money
Having
by
said
now, don't you
that, we
think?
read a story. We only have 2 minutes left. We read a story about how they bought golf, essentially.
Yep.
And we've said to you, after they bought golf, aren't they going to
What's
buy
next?
every sport?
Now
well,
they're
now
trying
they're
to buy
about to buy
tennis.
tennis. And I couldn't find one tennis player who was saying, hell no, I won't go. I'm not going to play a tournament, the WTA finals in wherever in Saudi. What's wrong with these people?
Well, I think at the end of the day, Jim, especially in tennis, which is an individual sport, like it's a way for them. If you don't go play in the WTA championships and you make it, think of all the money you lose out on. You could lose out on millions of dollars if you don't go play it. So if your tour championship, I mean, the tour championship has been in Beijing before. I'm sure there's a ton of human rights violations there.
That's a good point.
I just feel like, and I hate to even say this out loud, but that the Saudis are kind of smart in the sense that they are targeting sports that are individual sports and are very top heavy.
That's a very good point.
And the rest of the groups have to sort of scratch and claw. Like if you only make it through the first round or the second round of a tennis tournament, sure, you might walk away with tens of thousands
What's
of dollars,
the
but
name of
it's
the
not
coward
enough.
who's head of the PGA who trashed it and then did a 180 like 6 months later? The head of the PGA is saying all the right things when the original LIV thing happened, and then
Oh yeah, he invoked 9/11 victims
Right,
and then
exactly.
turned around and changed his mind.
Exactly.
You know who's
Okay.
going to be safe?
Who?
Curling.
Curling.
They won't have to worry about it.
Do you stay in touch with the curling gold medalists?
People should
I
know
do.
that.
So
I know,
I
she
do.
broadcasts
I
it.
do.
Curling.
Yeah, I mean,
You do?
not like
In the
it's not like we're
Olympics.
texting each other every day or anything, but every once in a while we'll comment on each
That was
other's
great.
Instagram posts or send a text or something. Yeah.
For those who don't know, Trenny was the broadcaster on the NBC coverage of the Olympic gold medal for the
That's right.
American
I just said
curlers.
that, Jim.
You did?
Yes, I did,
I
but
wanted to
it's
say it
okay.
again because I was so impressed.
All right.
Have a chocolate,
Welcome
Marjorie.
home.
That'll
I'm going to have a chocolate.
Very
That's
generous
right.
of you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. I'm glad you had a great trip.
Jay Monahan is, thank you, Jamie, is
Jay
the
Monahan.
head of the PGA.
Okay, we've been speaking with NBC Sports anchor and reporter NBC Sports Boston, Trenny Casey. After the new news, we're going to be joined by Carol Rose, Executive Director of the Massachusetts ACLU. She's going to talk about college cracking down on Israel and Gaza commentaries. Does that violate free speech? She's also going to talk about abortion on the ballot in a bunch of state elections around the country. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News. He is Jim Browdy. I am Marjorie Egan. Welcome to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio, live from the Boston Public Library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News. Mayor Michelle Wu will be with us a week from today here at the Boston Public Library, taking our questions at yours from 12:30 to 1:30. Hello again, Jim.
Hello again, Margie. We're joined now by Carol Rose. Carol's the Executive Director of the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. She's kind enough to join us monthly. Hello, Carol.
Hi, it's great to be here, everyone.
Great to see you.
Hey, Carol, great to see you too. Well, let's start with a Supreme Court case that the arguments are today involves whether people that are domestic abusers can have guns too. And the person at the center of the case sounds like a really nice guy. He did a lot of things, including shooting at a neighbor when the neighbor tried to intervene when he was dragging his girlfriend out of the car by the hair. Long history of being an abuser. What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, so this is a terrifying case about gun control. So as we know, the Supreme Court, especially Justice Thomas, Clarence Thomas, when they issued the Heller decision changing the view of the Second Amendment to say that it no longer applies to the ability for states to have militias, but actually to individuals to have to own their own guns no matter what. So this is a level of jurisprudence of law that keeps evolving. And the case now before the court is whether or not it's legal, it's constitutional, to have a ban on people getting guns if they have a domestic violence restraining order against them. So the ACLU has issued a amicus brief, a friend of the court brief in this case, and arguing that in fact the court below, which is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, went too far. And they said, if you look back to the early days of our Constitution, like the 1700s or the 1800s, we don't find any laws that say that domestic violence abusers are not allowed to get guns, right? But at that time, right, women also weren't allowed to vote, and there was no such thing as domestic violence. Women were considered property. So I think it's really a scary time, and what the ACLU is arguing is that, in fact, you can have some restrictions, reasonable restrictions on gun ownership, on the right to carry guns, even if the court has said that you have an overall individual right to have
Let me be as respectful as I can be of the appellate court in this case.
Oh, don't be, Jim.
Here's what one of these dopes on the court had to say. Listen to this. When talking about whether those who have had restraining orders for having committed domestic violence should be excluded from gun ownership under the Second Amendment, here's what he says. Could speeders be stripped at their right next?
Oh, God.
Could nonconformists be stripped next? So nonconformists and speeders, in this loser guy's mind, are in the same category as people who beat up women. I mean, this would be, I know it's hard to ever say this about the Supreme Court, especially you. This could really be it. If it turns out that if they say this is okay, what's not okay?
Right. Well, and that's the thing. There's no limiting factor here. And in fact, what's interesting is how the advocates on both sides, including the ACLU, have gone back and said, in fact, there are analogous situations where people weren't allowed. Like you could prevent...
Like what?
Way back in the 17 or 1800s, if somebody was threatening you, there were ways to prevent them from getting guns. It's just that it wasn't a domestic violence situation. It was rather just some other kind of attack or threat. So we're hoping the court will be able to pull out the analogous situation. So what our brief argues isn't that you have to find exactly the same fact pattern from the 17 or 1800s, but something analogous or similar. And we're hoping the court will apply a voice of reason and limitations.
And this all flows from that court in the Heller case deciding that a well-regulated militia means that individuals, the framers meant individuals.
That's right.
When they wrote well-regulated militia.
Right. Well, the other thing is, I suppose it doesn't fit into the argument exactly, but we've learned through well-documented research that people that wind up do mass shootings often have a history of domestic violence. So they kind of escalate from just as they do in verbal abuse, and then it's hitting, and then it's knives and choking and guns.
And I think it's so important to remember for all of us, that the Constitution, properly read, it's about the principles that are at stake, right? And each succeeding generation applies those principles to themselves. So, slaves said, we don't want to be enslaved anymore. We want the principles to apply to us. Women said, we want the right to vote. Gay people said, we want the right to marry. So throughout history, we've seen the principles of the Constitution upheld, and yet changing with the times as we've developed as a civilization. And what's sad is that we have this court that would actually take us back to a time that was so repressive to so many people.
Isn't it somehow ridiculous to claim to be an originalist all these years later? I mean, when a slave is 3/5 of a man,
Exactly.
and women had no rights.
Well, they're
and children had no
originalists when it supports their argument, and they're not originalists when it doesn't support their argument.
But
I think Jim's right on
the
that.
whole originalist idea seems
ridiculous. I'm with you.
Right, because it means that we won't evolve as a civilization. And
So
the whole
why do
point
people like Scalia, the supposedly the biggest brain in the Supreme Court for years and years and years, why was he lauded? He was an originalist.
Well, I think he was a different kind of originalist. I think he was more about trying to apply some of the principles at stake, and that's been twisted now by people like Thomas to say it actually has to be the fact pattern back then.
Yeah.
And so, that's what makes it really distorted. And I'm hopeful that the court will come around this time. The court right now is actually sort of split, not so much to one side and the other, but into threes, right? So you have your three on the far right, three who are more reasonable, I would say, and then there are three in the middle. And I think it's going to be interesting this term to see how that splits on some of these really important cases.
Can I ask you a quick question about this? Who was the first Chief Justice? Was it Marshall? Was Marshall
Yeah.
the first? Okay. Do you may not know this. I should have asked you in advance to check it out. Do you know if anyone ever gave an RV to Chief Justice Marshall in the 1700s or whenever he
That's
was
an
doing
excellent point,
Chief
Jim.
Marshalling?
I'm pretty sure they
Chief Justice?
did. I'm pretty sure they
Okay.
did. Yeah, just ask Clarence Thomas.
Okay,
So we're really disappointed in you, Carol, on this next one. We're really disappointed. ACLU coming down the
I'm
side.
not disappointed at all,
Okay,
by the way.
well, I am.
Okay.
On the side of our former president.
I disagree with her, but I'm not
the gag
disappointed.
order in the Washington case. Tell us
Criminal
exactly
case, right?
what's happening.
Yeah. So first thing I just have to say is no other organization has done more than the ACLU to go after Trump on civil rights and civil liberties. I mean, we filed 400 legal actions against
Okay.
Donald Trump.
Don't
when
be
he was in office.
defensive.
I'm not being defensive. I just want people to understand that. But this is really about principle. And so what happened is in this case, the judge ordered a gag order.
Chutkan.
Chutkan said
Yeah.
and said that he can't talk about anybody.
This is the January 6th case.
Right, the January 6th case on the insurrection case, and saying that he can't talk about anybody. And the problem is...
No. She didn't say you
He
can't talk about
can't
anything.
target.
Can't target prosecutors, witnesses, that sort of thing. That's
Right.
different from can't talk about anybody.
Right, but it was the way it was framed was really, really broad, right?
Okay.
So the ACLU filed a brief and said, an amicus brief, again, a friend of the court, and said you need to narrow that. It can't be like you can't say anything bad about the prosecutor who's a public official out in public, right? And so intimidation, that's fine. You can have a gag order against things like intimidation, but what you can't do is to say you can't talk about the case or you can't say you don't like the prosecutor or things like that, because those are matters of public concern. And in fact, the judge came back and narrowed the gag order considerably, which was exactly what the ACLU
So you
was
okay
asking
now?
for.
You're okay
Yeah.
with? Oh, you
Yeah.
are?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, because we were looking for a narrowing of the original order, not to say we shouldn't have the gag order
So
at
how
all.
did she narrow it? By using language like intimidation and that sort of thing?
Right, exactly. And so
Okay.
that kind
good.
of a judge has a right to do that to protect witnesses, but it's important that and this is why the ACLU enters into these moments. It's really important that if we say that Donald Trump is not above the law, and we do say that, then we have to make sure that Donald Trump gets the same due process
totally agree
protections
with
as
you.
everybody else,
Totally
so that
agree with
nobody can say he didn't have a fair trial, right? We want to make sure he has a fair trial by the letter of the law, so that if and when he's convicted, then it holds up on appeal.
Help me understand this, though. Since he is the former president, obviously everybody knows who Donald Trump is. If he's calling witnesses liars and prosecutors racist and saying the judge is the most biased judge in the history of America, that's not intimidation, but it undermines people's confidence, I think, in the judicial people. You know, when he keeps going
He's
after
he's entitled to undermine people's confidence. And
Right.
But I can't imagine a regular person going into court that wasn't Donald Trump and being able to get up there and attack the judge and the judge's clerk and the people that
Oh,
are
you mean
testifying.
like in the civil, in the fraud trial?
On the
you're talking-
stand. Yeah.
Right. No, I mean, I think that's right. But partly we want to make sure that these kinds of gag orders are actually very narrowly tailored to prevent things like intimidation and threats and things like that. Because otherwise, if you can get away with it with Donald Trump, you can get away with it with every defendant.
So he can just impugn everybody's integrity and that's fine.
As long as he doesn't threaten them or incite people to violence against them and things like that.
Okay.
But
I mean, you don't
Marjorie,
have to,
you're acting.
I don't like it either, Marjorie.
Yeah.
Just to be really clear, I don't like it. But I think it's really important, again, if we're going to say that Donald Trump is not above the law, we have to make sure that he has a fair
I guess
trial
the
just like
problem
everybody
is
else.
When with someone, this is different, obviously, but when Giuliani was calling those two women, the vote people,
In Georgia.
saying they were liars and they were transporting drugs, and he didn't say go out and attack them, but
Right.
he impugned their integrity and made them part of a plot so that they had to leave their home. Somehow, it doesn't seem like that that should be okay.
I just want to say, I mean, I agree with you. It's not okay.
Yeah.
But the question is whether or not, as a matter of law, you can gag them anyway. And what are you going to do anyway if he keeps doing it, which he's likely to do? Like, throw him in jail for that?
Yes.
It's unlikely.
Well, I mean, yes, I think is the answer. And by the way, after his performance yesterday in the fraud civil trial, I think he wants to get thrown in jail. I think he, by the way, here's a little bit, if you didn't hear it, Letitia James, who's the New York Attorney General, who's bringing the civil proceeding, addressed reporters outside the Manhattan courtroom after Trump had testified, Trump as in Donald Trump, had testified yesterday.
He rambled, he hurled insults, but we expected that. The numbers don't lie. And Mr. Trump obviously can engage in all of these distractions, and that exactly what he did, what he committed on the stand today, engaging in distractions and engaging in name calling.
So I guess following up maybe on what Marjorie said and what you said about treating him like any other individual, when this judge who's doing the civil fraud case has another trial next week, and a defendant gets on the stand, as Trump did yesterday, and says the exact same kind of things about Trump, I'm assuming that judge would not let him or her say one more word after they said it the first time. He did the judge did threaten, I may excuse him and take negative inferences on every single. So he did some threats. I can't imagine, I haven't been in a courtroom as a lawyer in decades.
They wouldn't get away with it.
They wouldn't get away with it for 30 seconds.
Well,
so despite all this rhetoric about treating him the same as everybody else,
he's being treated
he
differently.
is being treated differently.
But I don't think that he's going to get away with it, because this is a bench trial. And ultimately, just what you just heard, the numbers don't lie, and the decisions are going to come down. This is the judge who gets to make the decision about whether or not he's guilty. Right?
Well, the judge already decided that he was liable in terms of fraud.
Right.
The issue is the amount now, right?
Right. So
here's another question for you, by the way, which you may not know, and we should talk to somebody if you don't know, Judge Gertner, somebody. I understand that the Manhattan District Attorney decided not to pursue criminal charges on this. And he took a lot of heat. Two of his prosecutors, I think it was two of his prosecutors, quit.
Yep.
One of them wrote a book or some such thing. After this testimony is on the record, which apparently was so overwhelming that the judge declared that all that's left is damages, is the amount of the damages, not the underlying issue of fraud. Is it not possible that, having heard that, the Manhattan DA can come back and say, this case is stronger than I thought, particularly since this is not now all under oath, and initiate a criminal proceeding based upon the same set of facts?
I don't think it was dismissed with prejudice. So I don't think
So
there's
he could.
anything that, unless it was dismissed with prejudice. And I don't know, but if they didn't.
I think you're right. I think
they just
heard
failed
federal
to prosecute.
prosecutors say exactly that. This could
That
turn
what?
into a criminal
That it could?
case.
The same
Yes.
set of facts, you mean?
Same set of facts.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have a problem with things like double jeopardy when you have a civil case on one side and then a criminal case. So
we're going to talk one last thing about Trump in these trials. We're going to talk to John King, who did a really good analysis last night at 1:20, a really good analysis last night of the New York Times Siena polling, which showed Trump ahead in 5 of the 6 battleground states. But that same poll, I believe it was the same poll, correct me if I'm wrong, either of you, said that while the indictments have had absolutely no impact on Trump's numbers except to elevate them, that 6% of the people who said they were voting for Trump said they would not vote for him if he were convicted in any of these criminal matters, and that 6%, arguably, assuming that's a moment in time, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, would turn the tide away from Trump and back to Biden.
Well, and I also just want to say, this is why it's so important that we all go out and vote on Election Day. And this is Election Day, right?
Not in Brookline. One of the texters just sent me a text.
It's not Brookline today?
Not Brookline. No, it is not. That's why I didn't see
I'm
any
so
signs.
sorry.
I see signs. That's how I know I'm supposed to go vote. I saw no signs. I didn't know.
Well, I just got campaign literature from my former producer at NECN, John Vinskoy, who's a member of the
I'll
select
double check
board.
it. Texas says it's in spring, not fall.
Whoops. My apologies. I'm sorry for all you Brooklineites out there.
That's okay. I could be wrong, but that's what the texter said.
Can you check that, Jamie? So since one of us is giving bad advice,
Okay.
It's by me. Go ahead.
Oh, so let's move on. This was very interesting dilemma, free speech-wise, on what's going on with college campuses and people, students talking about not feeling safe if they're Jewish, not feeling safe if they're Palestinian. I don't know. This is a little bit far-fetched. There was this interview with this guy, Alec. Was it Alex Mori or Fabiola Cineas, the guy from FAIR,
Right.
FAIR. Yeah, Alex Mori, the director of, it's called the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression.
Yep.
He said, this seems a little far-fetched, but the problem here is that we have this generation of hovering parents who have thought their parents could fix everything. They never had to confront any views that upset them. Now they get to campus and they want to go to someone and say, fix this for me, I'm upset. You know, mommy and daddy aren't here, but the university should make me feel safe. That's kind of exaggerated, I think, but they're basically saying that there should be more, that we're inhibiting free speech in these colleges.
Yeah, you know, it's really a hard time, and I just want to put that out there that, you know, part of the reason the ACLU defends free speech is because words are powerful. Like, we don't defend free speech because words don't matter. We defend them because they're powerful. But that's all the more reason that we need to make sure on college campuses that all the different views can be heard. You know, in the ACLU, we're a domestic civil rights and civil liberties organization, so we don't take views or positions on international conflicts. But we do oppose efforts to stifle free speech on college campuses or free association and things like that. And so it's really important. And so we've put out a Know Your Rights flyer for students on college campuses so that they kind of know what the contours of their ability to protest and to also feel safe are. And it's a tough time for college campuses and a tough time for students, but I think if we hold true to our principles of free speech, you know, the alternative to creating a space for speech to be heard is violence or suppression.
So then
neither of which are good for democracy.
So how do you react then to very wealthy donors? I'll pick two places, Harvard and the place I went to school, the University of Pennsylvania, where a lot of donors have been criticizing Claudine Gay, the new president of Harvard, for not speaking out forcefully enough and soon enough against the terrorism perpetrated by Hamas. And it's even more intense in Philadelphia, where they want McGill, the president, to resign. Are you critical of donors who are trying to use their donations to essentially cause leaders to say something that they hadn't said?
Well, you know, it's interesting. As a legal matter, they have a right to say, we don't want to give money to you if you don't take a position that I agree with. So from a legal matter, it's certainly right for them to be able to do that. So they also have a free speech right. So these are conflicting free speech rights, okay? At the same time, I think that history has shown us that, you know, whenever we engage in trying to blacklist people because we don't agree with their speech, it may be possible from a, you know, corporations can decide not to hire people because they don't like their positions on things. There are some limits on that if it's discriminatory based on race or religion or things like that. But that's a free speech right too. So while I personally may not agree with it, it's certainly a right that they have. But I also think that it's really important that the universities stop back and say, you know, what is our job here? Because it's different than a corporation, right? A corporation may have its own views, right? And a university may have its own views. But the job of a university is to create a space where different views can come together. And we certainly know that for these young people, how many of us tried on bad ideas when we were young? Right? And so you want to have a space where people can try on ideas, say things, and not necessarily have to live with that for the rest of their lives. And I just think we all need to bring the temperature down and create space for people to, you know, really have their voices heard. You know, I go back to...
No, especially in a country like this where a political debate has become so civil. That's a easily attainable
Well, I want to
goal,
go back, you know,
say.
Justice Louis Brandeis, who
I remember
was
him.
the very famous, you know, Supreme Court justice, and he wrote about the First Amendment, and he's the guy who came up with the doctrine of counter speech, right? And he wrote, and I quote, in Whitney versus California, if there be a time to expose through discussion the falsehoods and fallacies, to avert the evil by the process of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that all of us together, if we care about our democracy and we don't want to see this country sort of go into a civil war or some kind of violence, that we create the space to actually not only permit speech, but actually engage in listening to each other.
So By the way, can I interrupt to say I was wrong? There is no election
There's
today
no
in
election
Brookline.
today in Brookline.
It's March 5th.
Thank
My
God.
sincere apologies.
So the ACLU, in your newsletter, or whatever you call it, what do you call it, the newsletter?
The docket.
The docket, okay. Said that the Anti-Defamation League and Brandeis Center for Human Rights called on university leaders to investigate pro-Palestinian student groups alleging their speech constitutes material support for terrorism. You've objected to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, material support for terrorism is actually just that, material support for terrorism. It doesn't mean that because you have a chant that many people find offensive or even scary, or because you express views that you don't like, that you should be targeted with everything that's ever happened. I mean, somebody might say, I believe in communism, right? Does that mean that everything that's ever been done in the name of communism, whether in Russia or China, is something that you're then targeted with? And so this goes really back to the post 9/11 period, where there were a lot of efforts to try to silence people or to try to prosecute people criminally for material support for terrorism, not based on any actions that they did, not based on any violence or anything like that, or even money, but rather just their words. So words alone should not constitute, unless they're words like incitement or direct threats. I mean, those are obviously criminal. But other than that, the First Amendment really protects those rights to have words. It's a little different in public college campuses than in private campuses.
Yes.
So in a private campus, because there's also the right of the private college to say, these are our beliefs, and if you don't like our beliefs, don't come here. They have a right to do that. I may not agree with it, but they have a right to do it. At a public campus, that's the state.
They can't expel someone, a student, because he or she or they have a different position on an issue than they can?
It's up to, if there is a code of conduct that a student has violated, that's like a contract. So the student may have violated the contract. I'm not saying the student couldn't have some claims, but it's a lot harder in a private university to have the university be liable for that.
So Brandeis is a private university.
Correct.
So maybe that's why they're doing this then.
Correct.
Okay, we got to move on because we only have a minute left. Two things. One, we don't have time to talk about it, but I want to give you props at the ACLU of Massachusetts for this BIPOC to the ballot.
Oh, I'm so excited about it.
Campaign, Brockton, Pittsfield, and Springfield, urging particularly voters of color to come out. But I just want to ask you really quickly, we're going to talk to John King about this a little later. Huge vote on a constitutional amendment protecting abortion rights on the ballot in Ohio today. We read a story that the Republicans who dominated the entity which decided what the wording that would go before voters were able to replace fetus with unborn child, which it would seem to me for those people for a living, and people often read the summary as they're in the voting booth.
And it made it appear that they could have abortion practically up to the moment of birth.
Exactly. I mean, that's ultimately the outcome. If it prevails, I think it is fair to say that a red state, if it prevails, a red state came out strongly in favor of the constitutional right to an abortion. If it fails, and especially close, maybe no one will listen, but it's fair to argue the language that these brilliant Republican people put in help determine an outcome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, again, this is where words really matter. And I think it's important to know that in Ohio, a vote for yes on number one is going to protect the right to abortion care. If it fails, that means there's going to be no right to abortion, including in cases of incest and rape and miscarriage and all sorts of other things. So I do think the good people of Ohio are going to do the right thing. And I think if we've seen across the country in Kansas, Kentucky, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, all of these places, whenever it's gone to the ballot, the people have voted that whatever your personal beliefs are about abortion care, it's really important that it's your decision with your family, with your doctor, with your whoever is your religious leader if you have one, and it shouldn't be the choice of the government to dictate what you do.
Let me just say, by the way, as someone who used to do ballot campaigns for a living, even if I disagreed, I always found the Secretary of State and the Attorney General's office
Red Book.
incredibly fair in terms of the language they use to present to the voters. Again, even if I wasn't happy with it, this is an abomination. Totally trying to tilt the scales.
Well, and they tried to make it so you had to have a 60% vote majority.
Well, they lost
and they lost
in
on
August.
that.
Yeah,
but
they did.
you know that when the other side is trying to do things to change the rules at the last minute,
that they're worried.
Good. And hopefully they'll be worried with good reason.
Exactly. Nice seeing you, Carol
Thank you very much, Carol Rose.
We've
been speaking to Carol Rose, who's Executive Director of the ACLU of Massachusetts. Coming up after a quick break, we're going to talk with the Boston Foundation's Lee Pelton. We're going to find out much of the reason why practically you're going to be a millionaire around here to afford a house in Boston or in any of its suburbs. We're going to talk about that with him and other things. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marge Regan. We're live at the library, streaming at facebook.com/GBH News, youtube.com/GBH News. As Marjorie has said, and I've said, the mayor will join us here for an hour a week from today. That's the 14th. From 12:30 to 1:30. We're joined now, though, at the library by Lee Pelton. Lee's the president and CEO of the Boston Foundation, also a member of GBH's Board of Trustees, and the former president of Emerson College. Nice to see you, Lee.
Thank you. Good
Thank
to see
you
you.
very
Thanks.
much, Lee Pelton, for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So you've got this new report, I think it's going to be out tomorrow, about zonings, using zone as a tool for exclusion based on race and class and family stuff. What's that about?
Well, it's an important report, and we're going to have a webinar. I think all 750 people have already signed up for it, so there's some real interest in this. Let me say something about zoning historically. I tend to use the word land use rather than zoning, because the history of land use in this country, zoning, has always been about exclusion. And in fact, the founding of this nation was around land use. When we settled here, we took away land from Native Americans, wealth, and made it our own. And land use is always about privilege and wealth and power. And that's the way we've used it in this country. We also did that in the southwestern part of the country with Mexican and so on and so forth, so Mexico and so on. So this is about zoning, but it is.
We call it land use on this show, Lee Pelton. I want to be clear.
Thank you. And so, as part of our racial wealth gap program, the Boston Indicators, which is overseen by great leader Luke Schuster,
does great work.
He does great work. And we asked someone else who does great work, Amy Dain, D-A-I-N, to do a 100-year look back on zoning in Boston. And what she discovered is that that zoning created restrictions which were maybe unintentionally, but nevertheless affected a variety of people.
Sometimes intentionally.
Sometimes intentionally. So if you look in the 1920s at zoning, and by the way, for the most part is by municipalities, not by the state. And if you look at zoning in the 20s, it was really meant to exclude Jews and Catholics and so on and so forth. And then during the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, it was meant to exclude African Americans, migrant families, and other sorts of groups, low-income groups, from being and from living in suburbs.
You know, I only read the introduction and the foreword, and I intend to read the whole thing, and I think it's great you guys did this. This, to me, and I think the report touches on it, correct me if I'm wrong, because you just touched on it, makes a really powerful case for the men and women on Beacon Hill to have the courage to take this issue in hand and decide that when cities and towns are going to resist diversity in any way, whether it's families with kids, poor people, people of color, etc., the state's got to step in. They did step in with Charlie Baker's, whatever that was called, the zoning, the density around T-stops, and good for Maura Healey for arguing that these accessory dwelling units, these under 900 square foot units, would be as of right on a state level should this legislation pass.
That's my old age plan, by the way. Live in the backyard. I think that'll work out well for a lot of us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to talk to the kids first. But and if for those who say it's not necessary, places like Milton, this alleged progressive enclave, as we just read in the Boston Globe, are messing with these accessory
Well, I think they have
dwelling
2-acre zoning in Milton. That's a lot of land.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, but I think we're talking about not saying that if you live on your 1 acre or 2 acre house, you're going to have to, build an apartment building next to your house. We're talking about zoning areas, I think.
No, you were saying you're entitled. This Healy legislation wouldn't mandate anything,
right?
But it would say your individual city or town can't preclude you from building a unit that complies with the
building
state
going
law.
Forward.
Going forward.
Going
correct.
forward,
That's
yeah. So people aren't thinking that they're going to come out and build
But does this
7
report,
apartments
that
in
was
their
a question
backyard.
in there. Does the report make recommendations about things like the state stepping in when cities and towns are falling down on the job?
Well, I think that's a central recommendation, is that the state has to step in. And you mentioned the MBTA Communities Act.
The Baker thing, yeah.
Yeah, which requires, suburban municipalities to plan for density around the T stops. And
That's like 170 some communities.
yeah.
A lot of communities, yeah.
And let me say this. So some of the reaction to this comes from a well-intentioned place. I haven't seen these, but I've been told that if you were to go to Newton, you would see all of these signs in reaction to the MBTA Communities Act, save the villages. And there is that history of, Newton villages. And there are people who are fearful that density and a certain kind of housing will disrupt and undermine the pristine beauty and gathering places of these.
You believe that? You really believe that?
I believe that people, I believe that some people, yes.
Some,
yeah,
some.
Right. I'm not as cynical as you might be. So.
We're talking to Lee Pelton, the head of the Boston Foundation. And I assume, Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, when you told us and the world about a year ago that you and the Boston Foundation, I think the Barr Foundation, the Fed, I'm not sure who was involved, we're going to update the infamous Federal Reserve study from 2015. That's the one that everybody has memorized. $248,000 of wealth for a white family, $8 for a black family, 0 for a Dominican family. That one of the ways you were going to expand on what was done by the Fed was to go into the causes, how we got to this place where there's such a wealth differential, and zoning or land use, as you call it, is one of them, right?
That's one of it's a prime example in the Commonwealth and in Boston that creates this, this disparity. And again, I've said this before, I'll say it again. Closing the racial wealth gap is not a zero-sum game, because if we were to close the racial wealth gap, we would create prosperity for everyone. It's estimated that the failure to close the racial wealth gap in the United States has cost us about $17 trillion to the economy. And if we could just, at the end of the show, close the racial wealth gap in Massachusetts, it would add about $25 billion to the economy over the next 5 years. So, So
but
that's why
let me
it's so
ask you something,
important.
though. The Save the Villages thing, I assume if they are well-meaning people, they might be concerned. Maybe my classroom is going to go from 25 to 35 or something for my kid or something like that. But what I think you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about changing zoning so you can have more housing in certain areas. Yeah. It's not talking about, like I said before, going backwards and taking away what people have. It is talking about prospectively being able to do this.
What do you mean taking away what people have? What does that
because
mean?
I think people get nervous about that. They think I'm going to...
What are you going to take?
Their land, Jim.
Well, I don't think anybody's talking. I mean, beyond the fact it's probably unconstitutional, nobody's talking about taking the land.
Well, I think there's a misunderstanding in some cases about exactly that we're going to have all these, like I've said, 7 apartments going to be built like right across the street from me where I have, I've lived for 200 years or something like that.
Well, what we have to remember, zoning, and I'm not sure if everybody understands this concept, zoning is about restrictions. It's not about expanding.
Right.
It's about restricting land for a particular purpose. So a government agency could come in and take and rezone some area and restrict it for agricultural or open spaces. That all is well-intentioned, but open spaces in a city at a certain extent could actually, have the opposite effect because it doesn't allow for the density that you need in multifamily housing and so on to sort of democratize, the cities or municipal areas.
Yeah, they were having this fight in Franklin Park, right? People were fighting about whether they're going to keep Franklin Park open or they're going to have more housing in Franklin Park. And I'm not even sure that's resolved yet. Is it resolved?
I don't know.
Okay, well, that was a big fight there. Yeah. People thought we wanted to keep the open space thing and not have the dense housing.
So you can imagine the well-intentioned, conservationists would want more open spaces. And so that's why I say it's not, some of this is well-intentioned, but produces outcomes that are not healthy.
I would say if people are watching on Facebook, about this much is well-intentioned. Can we agree on that? I'm sorry. But, by the way, the title of this damn report of yours is not well-intentioned. The title of the report is Exclusionary by design.
Yes,
exactly. I assume that.
Well, you have to read the whole thing.
By the way, if people want to be part of this webinar thing, is this open to the public or is it by invitation?
Yeah, it is. You can go to our website, and
tbf.org,
tbf.org, and sign up and see it.
When is this thing?
It's tomorrow, I think at 10 o'clock, and it's about an hour.
Great.
It's about an hour long.
Fabulous.
And again, it's a webinar. It's not a Zoom. And as I said, we've got 750 people signed up so far.
That's great. Exclusionary by design. It's out tomorrow from the Boston Foundation.
Our staff picked up on the Supreme Court.
Why don't you read that? I think it's important.
We were just talking with Carol Rose from the ACLU about this case before the Supreme Court about domestic abusers, convicted domestic abusers being able to get guns. And the Supreme Court on Tuesday, our staff just reported this for us.
That would be today.
Yes, seemed ready to rule that the government may disarm people subject to domestic violence orders. Several conservative justices, during a lively argument, seemed to be searching for a narrow rationale, one that would not require them to retreat from the Second Amendment test the court announced last year that looks to history to assess the constitutionality of gun control measures. So that could be a good thing if they I mean, it seems like common sense. You don't want people with domestic violence.
Well, listen, I know you would agree with me what I'm about to say. We have a fetish for guns in this country.
We do.
We have more firearms than we have people. And you remember maybe 20 years ago, there would be these advisories, don't go to South Africa, don't go to that because they're unsafe. We ought to put one out for the United States of America because we are an enormously violent country. 8 people a day, every day will die from firearms. And the issue with firearms is that they're fatal. And especially firearms that have, that can, shoot rapidly and have
high capacity
and so on. In Sandy Hook, which we all remember, obviously, it took that gunman about 90 seconds to kill about 26 people, most of whom were 5 and 6 years old.
Yeah.
So we've got. There's a famous study done by the Israeli army. People are conscripted, and so there were a lot of young people who were part of the army, and they noticed that there was a significant suicides. You do your service Monday through Friday, then you go home and come back on a Monday, and there were a number, the suicide rate was really high. You know what they did? They said, you can go home, but don't take your gun.
Yeah.
And that reduced suicides by 43%. And that's the issue with guns. They're fatal, and if they're high capacity, then they're even more so. There's no defense against them.
Speaking of guns, obviously we've talked a lot, as has all of America, but particularly in New England, about the horror in Lewiston. This Maine Community Foundation is doing work to obviously support the families and the community there. Do you have does the Boston Foundation have some connection to this?
Well, we do, but only in an advisory role.
Okay.
We're not there. They are doing this, and we've advised them, but we're not participating. Clearly there was people, agencies dropped the baton. The sheriff's office, the Army Reserve, they dropped the baton.
Well, I'm not sure that the Army did. They passed on the message. The law enforcement people.
Yeah, but there's no protocol. There was no coordination. So
That's correct.
I think so there were gaps. There were gaps there, and that was the issue. But again, the issue is guns. That's just
Well, the issue is guns, but what I think is important to say about Maine, I know it's a rural state, is we spent a lot of time on this show, not with you, trashing Republicans for not giving a damn about gun executions. The governor of Maine is a Democrat. Angus King, a senator, caucuses with the Democrats. And Golden, the congressman, who all of a sudden had an epiphany and basically said, I'm flipping my position, because it's one thing when you murder people in other states, but when you murder people in Maine, then we got a problem, and everybody's celebrating him, which I don't totally get. These are Democrats, too. It's not a unique province of Republicans. Lee Pelton, in your former life, you were president of Emerson. You spent a lot of your life in higher education. We talked to you several times after the Supreme Court decision gutting affirmative action in admissions in higher education. And we talked a lot about the fact that the decision made clear that there are some workarounds, not to evade the purpose of this horrible decision, but workarounds. The governor of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, and the Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, have put out some guidance around how colleges can deal with issues of racial equity without violating the Supreme Court thing. And I mean this with total respect, because I know both their hearts are totally in the right place on this. I'm not sure it added that much to what we already knew. Maybe they're trying to clarify it for anxious administrators at colleges. What did you take away from what Healey and Campbell are doing?
It built on, it built on the, what the Biden administration issued, many months ago. So it is some commonsensical approaches that, you can think about, legacy admissions, think about early decision, which tends to, for instance, favor, folks with wealth and money.
I did not know that until about a week ago. We talked to Kirk Carapezza, our education reporter, that you don't know what financing you're going to get if you apply early decision. Then you could be stunned.
Yeah, right. And there's the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education, has taken up this issue based on some complaints with respect to legacy admits and wealthy donors, and so we'll see.
Filed by the Lawyers for Civil Rights here in Boston, by the way. If I can interrupt just to say, their guidelines say institutions can, quote, look beyond traditional measures such as grades to a more holistic view, which could include race. What I think we discussed with you and others, they are, I guess, emphasizing you can ask a student, an applicant, in his or her essay or their essay, how race has affected them, and cross your fingers and hope that Mr. Bloom is not going to take the case to the Supreme Court and say it's just a backdoor way of violating the Constitution. Have you seen anything in the months since this, again, as a former president, that convinces you that a lot of the hole that was created by the Supreme Court can be filled, or this is just on the margins?
No, I think higher education will figure out a way forward. What was missing for me in this conversation is that the most important thing that colleges and universities can do, the first thing, is to renew and make public their commitment to diversity. And that's where you begin, with a set of values and understanding the efficacy of diversity in learning environment. So I would have added that, to the state's very commonsensical,
And when you say renew their commitment, you mean in public statements or in their brochures or when the kids come to visit the college?
All of that.
All of that. Okay.
Absolutely.
And talking about that.
Do it publicly.
Yeah. Because you do see, you sometimes even in 2023, you see brochures with 20 white kids, one Asian kid, and one black kid.
Don't you remember, wasn't it Michigan? Wasn't it Michigan
that's not exactly.
that photoshopped a black kid into their he doesn't want to criticize another whatever, but I'm pretty sure that Michigan did that.
It's 2023 here. You're going to get with the program, or what's the story?
Can we just end on this in a second? I hope you're a much more optimistic person than I am, which doesn't take much. But like when California repealed affirmative action long before the Supreme Court did it, they haven't made up a lot of the ground that was lost. So why are you hopeful that, because everybody's in the game now? Is that why? Why are you more hopeful than I?
Well, I'm hopeful that that the goodwill and the efforts to to maintain or increase diversity is, I think it will continue, and I'm confident in that.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. Nice to see you. Good luck with the report tomorrow. Again, if you want to be part of this webinar at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, you go to tbf.org.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Lee
Thank
Pelton.
you so much, Lee Pelton. Great to talk to you.
Nice jacket, too, by the way.
Very nice jacket.
Very
yeah.
nice jacket.
I like the button thing around the collar there. That's very nice, too.
Nice
We've been
jacket.
speaking
It
with
is what it is.
Lee Pelton, President and CEO of the Boston Foundation. He previously served as the 12th president of Emerson College, so he knows obviously a lot about the affirmative action decision from the Supreme Court.
Can I say one thing before you
What?
go? The fact, this is how pathetic the state of this country is. The fact that we are celebrating that the Supreme Court may agree that a perpetrator of domestic violence
Shouldn't have
cannot
a
get a
gun.
weapon is a cause for celebration. I mean, how pathetic
It's a sad situation. This guy is the brilliance of bringing this particular case, because this guy's a real bad actor. This is not a black and white situation. This is somebody who has a terrible history.
Even if he didn't, is there one domestic abuser who has a restraining order out against him or her that should ever be allowed to have a weapon?
No, there
Okay,
isn't. But
fine.
I'm glad they got someone that was extreme,
glad they did
because
too. You're
otherwise they might not do the right thing. Anyway,
We're going to have some fun now.
We are going to have some fun. We're going to be talking about, with online cooking, big star, Sola El-Wali. She's got her first El-Wali. She's got her first cookbook out. It's this ultra-comprehensive guide called Start Here. It's a terrific and very cleverly done cookbook. She zooms in next. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jim Browdy. She's Marjorie. And we're live at the library, streaming at Facebook.com/GBH News, YouTube.com/GBH News. Mayor Wu will join us for an hour of Ask the Mayor next Tuesday, 12:30 to 1:30, right here at the library. So if you've ever fallen down, which I call it, the rabbit hole of online cooking videos, you no doubt know our next guest. Her instructional, totally real world, and always bingeable kitchen guides are everywhere. History Channel, New York Times Cooking, HBO, formerly Bon Appetit. Here's a taste, if you'll excuse the pun, of just that.
Hey there, I'm Sola El-Wali. I'm Sola. It's Sola here. I'm gonna have 1 hour and one secret ingredient to make a dinner and dessert. We're gonna make a version of the original hamburger. I'm gonna show you how to do some fun stuff with your leftover stuffing.
This is not staged.
No, it's New York Times. This is journalistic integrity. Yeah, these are f***ing awesome.
They are effing awesome, as was the chilled green tahini soba that I made last night from the cookbook. We're joined now on Zoom by Sola El-Wali, out with their first ever cooking book, the incredibly comprehensive Start Here instructions for becoming a better cook, Marjorie. This Monday, November 13th, she'll be at a Harvard Bookstore event with the great Joanne Chang from Flower and Myers and Chang at Cambridge's First Parish Church. That's where we just did the thing with Andy Borowitz last week, Marjorie, that great church in Harvard Square.
Yep.
She joins us now online. Sola, we're thrilled to meet you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for cooking out of the book. That's awesome.
I did great.
yes,
I'm
he's
really
very-
proud of myself. I want you to know.
He's quite the little chef over there, and he made a dig about me, and I'm not the little chef over there. But that's why I think for people that are intimidated, that feel overwhelmed, I think you've done something absolutely brilliant. Tell people about the concept of your cookbook.
Well, I really wanted to focus on core techniques because the idea is you learn these techniques and then eventually you don't need the recipes anymore.
Yes.
Because if you want to cook every day, you don't want to have to measure and look at a recipe. I want you to get this stuff in your gut, hone your culinary intuition.
I don't have any culinary intuition, but thank you very much,
No,
Sola.
but I think that's the thing that's so important about what you said, though, especially when you're pressed for time, is that people that know what they're doing can whip things up really quickly, and then people who don't know, I mean, people say a recipe takes 30 minutes, and an hour and a half later, I've still got my little quarter of a teaspoon thing out. I think that's what's revolutionary, really, about what you've done, is to perfect individual skills. To me, that's what really makes us different.
Well, I think it's so amazing when you have a fridge full of stuff and you can put an amazing meal on the table. It's a superpower. And I want everyone to have this ability because it does make you feel just so empowered to be able to cook for your loved ones.
Hey, Sola, did you read the Boston Globe review of your book this morning by Cheryl Julian?
No, I did not. It's
Okay.
behind the paywall.
Oh, it's great.
She refers to you as the next Julia Child, who is I look at the look on your face. So how do you react to that?
That's a bit much. That's scary. I don't want that responsibility.
You have to speak differently if you're the next Julia. In any case, so
No, that's not what it. To me, that is the same thing I was just talking about. That there were a whole bunch of women, including my mother, who couldn't cook anything, and then Julia Child came on the scene and showed people on television how to do it in a way that wasn't speaking down or intimidating. And I think that's what you've accomplished here. I think that's the comparison.
Well, she also accomplished she can mess up. That's one of your central themes,
That's right.
You can screw up and still prevail, right?
I think that's the most important thing to remember, to not get discouraged, because I mess up a ton. And no matter how long you've been cooking, you're going to mess up, and it's totally fine, and you're still going to have dinner.
So, Sola, I made this soba thing. And by the way, for those who don't know soba, it's buckwheat pasta, and it's a little, you have to get used to it. It takes a little getting used to. It's not if you're just used to the traditional kind of thing. I was so enamored of something I'd never heard of before, and I may mispronounce it, so correct me. Tadig, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is no way that I have the confidence or courage to do this. Can you explain what it is and why I should be willing to give it a try and mess up until I get to the promised land?
Well, it's a Persian rice dish, and tadig means bottom of the pot. So that's like the crispy stuff that happens when you cook the rice. And the crispy bit at the bottom of the pot can be made from potatoes or bread or lettuce, but my favorite version is where it's the rice itself that gets really crispy. And it is very difficult. You really got to get to know your burner and your pan, and it takes a lot of skill to know exactly how long to cook it. But it's so impressive when you pull it off, because you get this like amazing crackly golden rice cake, and it like oohs and ahs when you take it to the table, and it's so amazing because it's just rice. And it does take a lot of work, and I mess it up every time, but I think it's worth trying because it's like magic.
Well, it looks beautiful and sounds beautiful. I am going to try it this weekend, and I'll let you know. We're talking to Sola El-Wally, her new cookbook, which, by the way, if you need a doorstop, it's a fabulous doorstop, too. It is one big book there.
So
let me just say, start here, instructions for becoming a better cook. I'm sorry, Margie.
So, you got things about butter, you got things about custard, you got braising. Tell people, pick something to show the things that they can learn that will break down some of their fears. I mean, how you take them step by step. Pick something.
Well, I mean, the idea is the chapters go in order of difficulty, so you can like learn in a progressive way, and then within each chapter, the recipes go in order of difficulty.
Okay.
And
you start with eggs.
Taste. Well, I actually start with taste.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
You start with taste, because if you don't know what tastes good, how are you going to know if anything you're making is any good? And the great thing about it is taste can happen even without any cooking. You can just, one of the assignments in the book is to just go out and eat more and think about what you're eating, and eat at different places and eat at different people's houses, and just hone your palate. And I think that's the first place to start cooking, just eating, and everyone can do that.
You know, Sola, I assume most people, since you have reached superstar dimensions, knows your history, but most of us heard of you for the first time when you had the courage of Bon Appetit to call out racism, which I think took, at least as an outsider, took a lot of courage, particularly for a young person starting in the business. You then start a restaurant that closed in, 11 months? That's not exactly an auspicious beginning for a person to become a huge figure in the food world. How did you decide, despite what I've had to go through so far in both those instances, and I assume more, that this was going to work for you? How did you convince yourself of that?
I mean, I never thought it was going to work for me. I still am not convinced that it's working for me. You just keep going. I can't do anything else, so I have to keep cooking. And I always think to myself, like, a winner's just someone who didn't lose the last time. Yeah. So I've lost a lot more times than you even mentioned.
Well, I wouldn't say you lost, at least in the first situation. I think you helped change the food world a little bit because of your courage, but you're not the type to admit that. In any case...
So tell us how the cooking thing happened for you. Was this when you were a little girl growing up? How'd that happen?
Well, I grew up eating really well. My mom's an amazing cook, so I was really lucky and blessed to have this amazing home cooking every single night. But what really drew me into food was how it's such a great way to build community.
Yeah.
I didn't always get along with my family, but no matter what was happening in our lives, when we sat around the table, we would get along. And I felt that was true with anybody. And you can click with people from any kind of background, any political affiliation. Something crazy happens when you sit down at the table and you just unite. And that's really what drew me into cooking. And then I got sucked in by the technique, because it is such a technical, fun thing that you can never stop learning in.
You wrote a piece called, which I haven't read yet. It is, 568 pages. It's not like a one time, and there are 200 recipes, and they look, well, the one I made was great, and I assume the others are too. Why I hate pressure cookers. Why I hate pressure cookers because I'm scared of them. Why do you hate pressure cookers?
I don't think that they do what they promise. They're not always faster, especially when you're cooking something that's relatively fast, like rice. The time it takes for something to come up to pressure and depressurize, it actually takes longer. It's a little bit of a scam. And then for certain things like braises or beans, I actually feel like you get a worse result. Oftentimes when you braise meat, what happens is, because it is such high pressure, the liquid that the stuff is braising in ends up more flavorful than the meat. Kind of wrings all the flavor right out of the meat. And I think it's better to just go traditional, low and slow, get yourself a Dutch oven, and also it won't explode.
So I mentioned before you started with eggs, and you didn't, you're right, as you corrected me, you started with taste. But you have this whole big thing about eggs and temper management, different ways to scrambled eggs and different ways to boil eggs. These are kind of very basic things. So give us a little insight onto those things that most of us think we know how to do, but maybe we're doing it all, or messing up, as you would put it.
Well, I mean, if you're enjoying your food, you're not messing up, first of all. But I think eggs are a really great place to start learning about how heat works and how proteins cook, because it is pretty low stakes. It's affordable. And you can learn a lot. You can learn what really high heat looks like when you're trying to do a crispy fried egg. You can learn what low heat looks like when you're going for a creamy scramble. And you can learn how to multitask, because eggs cook so quickly. You can get they can think about how to do a game plan. One of the final recipes in that book is, in that chapter, is an epic breakfast with pancakes, eggs, and bacon.
Yes.
And it's about teaching you how to bring all that to the table at the same time and hot. And if you can do it with a low stakes breakfast, it kind of preps you for a big holiday meal, getting all that hot food on the table at once.
Where are you in the induction ovens?
I think they're amazing. I just don't have one.
Why don't you have one if they're so amazing?
Because I rent in New York. I have no choice. My appliances are terrible.
Yeah, because a lot of chefs are...
I'm going to get in trouble for this wallpaper.
Oh, you are?
What is the what is the wallpaper? What's on there?
It's flowers, but like technically in my lease, I'm not allowed to have it.
Oh, really?
Oh my goodness. Well, we won't tell.
Actually, your landlord just texted. She wants you to call right after the show. You know.
Yeah,
So-
but a lot of chefs are rebelling against the induction ovens. They say that they really need to have the gas. They really like that adjustment. Cooking shows, a lot of them have the gas. And now, you know, we're hearing, and you're a new mom, you know, we're not supposed to have gas stoves. I didn't know that. My children are fine as far as I know. But, you know, that's a big thing now, these induction ovens. And you got to get new pans and the whole thing.
I mean, we'll get used to it. It'll be fine. I'm not one of those people who are that against it. I do have gas and I love it because it is easy to see exactly how hot something is, but we'll get over it. That's not a big deal.
Where's the kid?
Not a hill I'm going to die on.
The kid's like 2 months old, right? How old's the kid?
Tomorrow she's going to be 10 weeks.
Oh, 10
Oh my
She's currently in the other room.
Oh my gosh.
How you dealing with that? You're a fairly busy person. How you dealing with the kid thing?
It's fine, you know, just need some more sleep.
Yeah, aren't you? I mean, that the 10 weeks is kind of the exhaustion phase. And when we talked about cooking and restaurants, I mean, you're not in the restaurant business in the same way, but you're in the cooking business. It's a very time-consuming operation. I know you got a great husband, and he helps out, but it's a lot.
Yeah, you know, it's still not as bad as running a restaurant.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a kid.
That's a hell of a statement there, Sola, I'll tell you. It's not as bad. How's having a kid not as bad as owning a restaurant? Can we return to the Bon Appetit thing? We're in a city. Joanne Chang is doing your thing at the
we
First
love
Parish
her.
Church. One of the most celebrated chefs, bakers, and not to mention one of the most wonderful people who has ever walked the planet. This is a city where in the last, half dozen years, ton of women chefs, ton of women restaurateurs, totally different from what it was like before. What's the state of the industry in terms of people of color, women? Are things dramatically better than at your time at Bon Appetit, or is it a slow train moving here?
I mean, I don't work in restaurants anymore.
I know.
So I'm just like, from an outsider, it really does feel like it. There's a lot more females in the kitchen. When I started, there were a lot of places where I was the only girl. And that's rough. Like, I had to really be a different person in order to survive that. And I feel like that's changed a lot. The kitchens I've looked into, it feels like it's more like 50-50. And it kind of keeps everybody in check a little bit, you know?
How about
Can't get away with the same nonsense.
How about people of color in the food industry?
Well, the one thing I have noticed in terms of food media is there's a lot more variety in the kind of recipes that are coming out and the kind of people that are getting platforms. And I think that's amazing because all food is delicious and we should embrace all of it. And it's also, we live in a time where you can get any ingredient, which is amazing. Like, you can have anything mailed to you. So we should have diverse pantries and palettes. And I think I'm seeing more of that. And that's awesome.
You know, I just want to mention again, because I don't cook very well and I'm very intimidated by it, but when I was talking about the basics here, you have a whole, at the beginning of your book, you know, how to keep your knife sharp, how to hold the knife, how to cut onions, how to cut, slice ginger. All these things are herbs. I mean, all these things are things that most cookbooks don't explain, or mastering a particular...
It's also a lot of humor, which keeps the pages turning, too.
And everybody's getting to be a better cook these days, and I think people who aren't, you sort of feel like a loser, I guess.
No.
Yeah, well, I think you do. I mean, it's not like you just can't have people over for pizza all the time. You have to, be a little bit more... I mean, Thanksgiving is a very stressful time for a lot of people.
Why don't you tell Sola what your signature dish is? See what she thinks. I'm going to tell her. It's prune chicken.
It's prune chicken.
What do you think
I haven't made that for years, but I used to.
You haven't?
No, that was what I did every time I had a dinner party. I had
So what have you been making in
chicken.
recent years?
I don't have any more dinner parties, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. But you make the things over and over again because you can make it in advance, and you feel confident. You don't have to do the cooking. It's done before everybody gets there. That's why I make it. So I think that there's a lot of. There's a lot of need for encouragement and feeling like you can make mistakes. But the mastering of the skills is such a crucial thing in terms of speed, I think.
Well, first of all, prune chicken sounds delicious.
Thank
Nothing
you.
to be ashamed
Thank
of.
you. Little capers on them.
It is good.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's great to have a solid dish in your back pocket. Who cares if you repeat it? But yeah, I wanted to put all those skills in there because when I started cooking, I felt like a lot of the cookbooks, it was like reading a different language.
Exactly.
You know, cookbooks assume you have this base knowledge, and I don't think everybody does. So I just wanted to put it out there. And if you don't want to look at it, just skip it, you know?
Okay, so before you go, pick a couple of recipes for those who are risk averse, or at least don't have great cooking confidence, that you think they can not only do, but will be really proud of themselves after they've done it. By the way, the thing I made, and I'm not a horrible cook, I'm not a great cook, was really simple and really spectacular. But give us a couple of your 200 recipes that you'd urge the feared amongst us to try out.
Well, I love the charred lemon risotto. Risotto, traditionally, you need wine and very fancy, like very high quality broth. But with this recipe, you char the lemon, and that deep blackening is what gives the broth so much flavor. So it's very affordable. So it's like really low risk. It's like 5 ingredients. You probably already have everything for it. And in half an hour, you're going to have a really comforting, cozy meal. So that's a great place to start.
I like it.
I also am really into the braised chicken thighs. It's more a method than a recipe. You're going to crisp the chicken up in your pan and then saute some aromatics in that chicken fat. And then you can kind of put whatever hearty veggies underneath the chicken and any kind of like flavorful liquid, you could use a jarred salsa. In the book, I have you make a salsa. You could do like coconut milk with curry, whatever you want. Put the chicken thighs on top and bake it. And you get really, really succulent, tender chicken, the nice soft veggies underneath, and crispy skin. And it's like super easy one-pot meal.
How's that sound to you?
And then for dessert?
Go ahead.
We're ready for dessert. Yeah.
Oh, for dessert, I have a really simple recipe for drop cookies. They're called Add Anything drop cookies. So it's like this base fun dough that you mix in one bowl. And then you can put whatever you want in there. And you can go crazy, like add pretzels and Fritos and marshmallows and have a lot of fun.
Are you as calm in life as you appear to be, or no?
No, it's complete chaos inside my brain.
Because you have that thing about you that is really impressive, and it's calming on the viewer, I should say, speaking for all viewers.
No.
No?
You know, like that one analogy about ducks, how they're calm on the surface and then the feet are crazy under the water? That's me.
Like this, underwater. Yeah,
like
that's a
that.
good one.
That's great.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Sola, the cookbook's great, and it's really a pleasure to
by the way. You
meet
should
you.
hold it up so people can see it. Can you hold it up in the camera so people can see it?
I believe that you can,
Yeah, it's
yes.
right here. Thank you very, very much for being here. Congratulations on all your great success. You're going to be at the Cambridge First Parish Church tomorrow.
Monday.
No, Monday on the book tour. That would be Monday, the 13th, talking with Joanne Chang, who runs a great restaurant, Myers and Chang, here, and a bunch of great bakeries, Flour Bakery.
And we're going to tell you how to get tickets in a minute.
Yes, we are.
Sola, thanks. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, we'll be talking with Sola.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Elweli, her new cookbook is Start Here, Instructions for Becoming a Better Cook. And it is really comprehensive. And if you feel intimidated, this will help you feel less intimidated. For more information about her coming appearance in Cambridge, go to Harvard Bookstore's website, harvard.com/events. That's harvard.com/events. The event at the First Parish Church is next Monday, the 13th, and she's going to be joined at First Parish Church by the great Joanne Chang. Thank you again for being with us. Coming up, CNN's chief national correspondent, John King. He's going to zoom into the BPL to give us the latest in national politics. On Election Day, he's going to talk about the significance of today's state elections and, of course, the Donald in the courtroom. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Margery Egan. We're live at the library, streaming at facebook.com and youtube.com/GBH News. The mayor, Mayor Wu, will join us a week from today from 12:30 to 1:30 right here at the library. We're joined now, I think he's in a car again, by CNN Chief National Correspondent John King, host of All Over the Map. John, it's good to talk to you.
He is in a car again, but he's actually about to cross from Virginia into Washington, D.C. So I'm near home on this election day. I'm just going to speak at a class at Georgetown University before counting some votes tonight.
Oh, well, these are going to be very, I think, important elections. You can tell us. I saw you last night talking to a suburban GOP woman who'd been voting as a Democrat recently, and also to Glenn Youngkin, the Virginia governor who's running for re-election. What do you hear?
Well, he's not on the ballot. The legislature's on the ballot today.
Oh, he's not running for re-election?
No,
oh, my
he's not
goodness.
no.
My mistake. I thought he was running for re-election.
He's trying to lead the legislative
Well,
charge.
he's certainly campaigning very hard for that legislative charge. But in any case, what are you hearing, John?
Well, we count the votes tonight. I think that you're right. These are off-year elections, but when you look at Virginia, it's the governor wants full Republican control of the legislature. If he gets it, he says he'll pass 15-week abortion restrictions, a ban after 15 weeks, with exceptions for rape, incest, and life of mother. And Governor Youngkin is posing a big question here. He thinks this is the middle ground. Republicans have been so punished in every election since the Dobbs decision that involves abortion in any way. The Republicans have lost. Governor Youngkin thinks he has the compromised middle ground here. If he's right and they can win in these suburban districts, it will be a big deal. You also have the incumbent Democratic governor in red state Kentucky on the ballot, Andy Beshear, who's popular if you look at the polls, but the president's underwater in Kentucky. It's a big red state. Donald Trump won it by like 30 points. So I think we're going to learn about the suburbs tonight. Ohio has an abortion constitutional amendment. We're going to learn about the suburbs. We're going to learn about whether, in the case of Virginia, this is about the Republican legislature. It's also about Governor Youngkin's presidential ambitions. He wants to run, probably not till 2028, but he wants to run.
Well, speaking of wants to run as not a majority apparently, but at least a significant number of Republicans are looking for an alternative, including, and I was shocked, the governor of Iowa, Reynolds, endorsing Ron DeSantis despite his threats from Trump and that it'd be the end of her career, and declining numbers for DeSantis. Is it too late? Assuming Youngkin prevails in these legislative battles, there are a lot of people who want him to enter the race. Is it too far into this cycle for him to get on the ballots in 50 states?
No, but yes, if that's a good cagey answer for you. Look, it's going to be late. He would have to be pretty quick to get on the Iowa or the New Hampshire ballot, right? The scenario, Youngkin, people around Youngkin want him to run. Youngkin's a pretty smart guy, and he sees the polls and he sees how Trump is ahead. Here's the scenario I would say to keep an eye on. If he wins the Republican legislature, and he can get in the next couple of, once they come back early next year, they cut taxes, they pass the 15-week abortion ban, they do more on his agenda to give parents more say over school curricula. If then Trump implodes, meaning one of these trials opens the trap door and the other candidates have struggled up to that point, then there's the rally around Youngkin moment. Now, you could write the Netflix miniseries and you might get turned away because it sounds too implausible. And so it's everyone is for it. Is it impossible? No. Is it likely? I would argue not, but we just live in these crazy times, Jim and Marjorie, where you just keep every option possibly on the table or at least deep in a drawer somewhere.
One race you didn't mention, I assume, I would like to say that I would know about because it's a Democrat trying to get the governor's seat, which I believe has not been in Democratic hands for a couple of decades. But the only reason I really know about it is because he's Elvis Presley's second cousin. Does Presley, who one of his platform items, which I can't believe is not a winner, is this is one of the states, Mississippi, that did not agree to Medicaid expansion, thus basically giving up tens of millions of dollars of federal dollars to improve the health of people in your state. Does this guy have a chance of winning the governor's race in Mississippi?
The polls have said he does have a chance. And I think you're raising an interesting question. Number one, the power of healthcare issue. Since the Democrats, remember when they first passed Obamacare, the Democrats, it hurt them in 2010. It hurt them a little bit in 2012, even as Obama won re-election in other races. issue that Democrats have. Maybe abortion now since Dobbs, but health care up until the Dobbs decision anyway has been the most powerful issue Democrats have had for the last 3, 4, 5 election cycles. Can a Democrat use it in Mississippi, saying, hey, poor rural people deserve health care too? It's a great question. Reeves also has some, scandal baggage, not directly to him, but this state welfare scandal that caught up Brett Favre, the former Green Bay Packers quarterback, in it. And I also say, look, after COVID, because of inflation, are voters just in an anti-incumbent mood, right? So, sometimes voters are just in a mood and they take it out on the guy in charge. So we'll keep an eye on it. And yes, it gets mentioned because he's Elvis's second cousin, so there's a celebrity nature to it. But imagine that. If a Democrat running mostly on health care can win in the reddest of red states, that would be a big deal.
Talking to John King from CNN.
John King, you wrote a piece about black voters in Wisconsin. And what'd you say in terms of what this could mean for President Biden?
That if he doesn't fix it in the year he has to fix it, he's going to lose Wisconsin. And if he loses Wisconsin, he may well lose Michigan because you need black voters there. And he may well lose Pennsylvania because you need black voters there. He may well lose Georgia because you really, really need black voters there. Some of it's about Biden, the toll of inflation, the lack of visibility. We've talked about this in previous weeks. Some voters recoil when you say it's the age question, right? They don't think that's fair. Whether you want to make it about age, whether you want to make it about vitality, let me make it about visibility. He is not out there in these communities where he's made promises to people. In the black community, they say, what happened to criminal justice reform? We think the jobs are going to the suburbs or to downtown, but not to our communities. The communities on the north side of Milwaukee, back at the heyday of the auto industry and the heyday of American manufacturing, used to be these thriving middle-class black communities. You walk through them now, and these are great, hard-working Americans. They just feel forgotten. And it looks like the politicians come and say, I need your vote, you're critical, and they make promises, and that the promises to them are always the first ones thrown overboard. So it's a giant problem. It's a giant enthusiasm problem, a little bit of openness to voting for Trump or voting Republican, but that's not really, the significant issue is, they don't see the president. They really want, we talk about how the Republicans think the vice president is a liability. In the black communities, they're like, where is she? We're proud to have a woman of color as vice president. Why isn't she here? So the lack of visibility by the president and the vice president in the communities of color that are so critical to his coalition is a giant problem. The White House says, oh, it's going to be fine by next year. Maybe they're right, but the calls beforehand told me it was going to be a problem. I was stunned by how just the disdain and the disaffection in a community that's absolutely critical to the president.
After you did this report out of Virginia that I found as fascinating last night on Anderson Cooper's show, as did Marjorie, you went to the magic wall and did a breakdown of the shocking, to me anyway, New York Times Siena poll that showed Joe Biden losing 5 of 6 swing states that he had won in 2020 to Donald Trump. I want to get to that well, let's actually get to that now. The most amazing part of that is when you were breaking it down into, I think, economy, Trump had a 22-point margin or some such thing, and you went on the list. The thing that caused me to do a double take, I think the topic, John King, was democracy. And it was a virtual dead heat. I think it was 48% preferred Biden to 45%, which obviously was within the margin of error. How do you explain that after what we've lived through since January 6th?
10 to 12 points of it, Jim, I cannot explain at all. I think about a third of it, about 33% of Trump's number. It was 48 to 45, I think was the number. Yeah. Who do you trust more? And Biden had the 48 and Trump had the 45. About a third of it is that Trump has convinced people the election was stolen from him. And that the Democrats are rigging elections, or that the establishment is rigging elections. So that's a cancer in our democracy. The rest of it I don't quite get. But again, if you're the incumbent president of the United States and you have made protecting democracy one of your most important calling cards, to be even with Donald Trump on that question tells you the profound ditch funk the incumbent president is in. Now, incumbents a year out, Obama was in trouble. George W. Bush was in trouble. You can go back and say Bill Clinton was in trouble. The poll numbers weren't great. So the Biden people are right when they say a year out, the incumbents the voters are tired of politics and they're in a bad mood or whatever. Yes, I give you that. So I discount the numbers to a degree, but these are bad. He's way underwater on the economy. He's way underwater in immigration. And pieces of his coalition, young voters, black voters, Latino voters, are they, definitely going to Trump? We can't say that a year out. But are they definitely shopping? Yes, they're shopping. And you start looking for a new car when you don't like your existing car. And so the incumbent has a problem. And he better fix, if he wants to get reelected, he better fix his sales pitch.
Well, we've heard staunch Democrats, including David Axelrod, who was a big operative with Obama, and James Carville, most famous from Bill Clinton's days, saying that the president should consider stepping down.
Not stepping down, not running. I mean, stepping down as the candidate.
Yes.
Yeah.
You mentioned it would be a little late for, Glenn Youngkin to pop into the Republican race were something to happen with Trump. But I mean, is this even in real consideration?
The White House says no. The White House says the president is up to the job and he's doing a good job. And look, there's a lot of good, how he's held the Ukraine coalition together. He's in some trouble with progressive now in the Israel thing, where he's standing with a democracy, that was attacked by terrorists, and the president thinks he's in the right place. He has some progressive issues there. There are a lot of good economic numbers. Prices are still high. Inflation has come down, but prices haven't really come down. But there are, he can find good data to run on. He's just not breaking through. And so you have these Democrats worried. And I think the president's team says no. And we all know Joe Biden, this is usually an attribute. He's stubborn Irish, right? That's why he is president. And they all say, you're the people who said we weren't going to win in 2020 after we lost to Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. So they say he's running, and they say he's not going anywhere. Those polls did cause this conversation, the volume on this conversation, to go back up. Watch the election results tonight. If Andy Beshear, a popular Democratic governor, loses in Kentucky, if in a state Joe Biden won by 10 points, Virginia, Republicans can capture control of the legislature even as they campaign on new abortion restrictions, then you're going to have Democratic panic. We don't know what's going to happen tonight. So when we have this conversation next Tuesday, we will know whether it has calmed down a little bit or whether it's gone into full panic.
I think Marjorie went into full panic. Her headphones just fell off.
I pulled my headphones off there.
That's
yeah,
pretty
an absolute panic
dramatic,
thing. But the thing is about Biden, I certainly had the impression when he ran in 2020, he talked about being a transitional president. I can't be the only American that thought that meant he was going to be in for one term and he was going to get out. And I have no problem saying that when you look at the president now, he seems like every other president. He's aged considerably in the job, everybody except Donald Trump, who was the only one that didn't seem to age noticeably in the job. And you think of him now, a year out, if he does not look great now and act great and talk well and all that kind of stuff, where's he going to be a year from now? Where's he going to be 5 years from now? And I think it's...
Well, that's why a lot of people are leaving him.
Exactly. So you wonder whether, and somewhere along the line, he must have changed his mind, because he did talk about being a transitional president. And I think that's what that means. You're going to transition in 4 years to somebody else.
Yeah, I think he would argue that he meant 8 years is fine, and then he transitioned to...
Yeah, okay.
Remember, he ran twice before and he didn't win. And so he had something to prove, and he proved it by winning the White House. And so you have to give the president that. And you have to give his stubbornness. Again, sometimes stubbornness, I'm stubborn. Sometimes it can be an attitude, sometimes it can be a negative. But he thinks he's the only one who can beat Trump. There are a lot of people around him who would never say this publicly, who say he worries the vice president of the United States could not beat Donald Trump. And that if you got late, some Democrats think it would be so exciting, it might actually help the party. A lot of Democrats think it's so late now, it would just be, crazy and nuts and hurt the party. I don't know the answer to that question, but he's running as of right now. One other quick thing. One of the things that has struck me in traveling, to your point about the age question, Biden needs to turn around people's views of the economy and his management of it. He needs to convince people he's doing what he can, and people out there make their own decisions about the border. He's going to have to explain his world stewardship and America's place in the world. He's going to have to improve those the democracy numbers Jim and I were talking about. I think one of his problems is that a growing number of people think he's not up to the job. Right. He doesn't have the stamina. Whether that's an age thing or a vitality thing, however you want to call it. If you don't think someone's up to the job, you don't read their entire resume. You don't listen to them. You don't give them an interview. You don't give them a job interview. If your threshold opinion is they're not up to the job, you don't spend the time exploring their case and giving them a second chance. And I think that's a psychological barrier for the president right now, among those people who think, even those who love him for kicking Donald Trump out of the White House, who, like you, Marjorie, would say, okay, time to move on. So this is a challenge for the president. I don't know how he fixes it. The White House says he will, but it's a big challenge.
Two last things from me, John King. We're talking to John King, who is somewhere on the Washington-Virginia border. John, 2016, we had the two least popular candidates who ever ran for president, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. 8 years later, we have two wildly unpopular candidates who are the likely nominees of their parties. Something is obviously wrong with those two pictures. What do you think it is? I mean, how do we end up with people that the overwhelming majority of Americans would prefer not to be their candidates?
I think both parties are going through. Donald Trump led an ideological, or at least a personal revolution, a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. Joe Biden came in as sort of the senior statesman after losing the first three contests in 2020. In the middle of the COVID pandemic, the Democratic Party said, we're going to go to an adult. They were about to have their generational transition, and they said, never mind in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So both parties are going through these ideological, generational, I would argue even regional changes. The Democratic Party is now the party of the suburbs. When I started doing this for a living, that was the Republican Party. The Democrats were the party of the blue-collar worker. That's now the Republican Party. So all these changes are happening at once. And like everything in our lives, technology and globalization and the economy, it's really messy. It's really messy. And I can't tell you where it's going to go. I can tell you that if you get a Biden-Trump rematch, it will happen in the next cycle, right? It will definitely happen in the next cycle. One of the reasons I keep, as of today, it's going to be Biden versus Trump. One of the reasons I keep saying don't rule out change is just because of what we're talking about. There's been so much volatility, so many surprises, that I think we just have to keep an open mind. But that disgust, Jim, but in both parties, you find people who say, really, these are our best choices? So does that affect turnout, number one? And does it affect the viability of third-party candidates if they can get on the ballot? And does that make a difference? All right. Wisconsin was won by 20,000 votes, by Trump in 2016, by Biden in 2020. A third-party candidate can make the difference, right? Go on to go to Arizona, go to Georgia, go to Michigan, go to Pennsylvania. So we are just in this volatile age where until we know for sure who the nominees are, and then for sure how many third-party candidates are there, and in what states did they make the ballot, then this is still the Wild West to me.
Okay, one last thing. You're a Dorchester kid, obviously a Patriots guy, but you just crossed into Washington, I assume. Washington Commanders. Rumors that the next coach of the Washington Commanders is going to be the current coach of the New England Patriots. You're an expert on numbers. What are the odds of that happening, John King?
I saw that story that Belichick's going to recreate the band, get Josh McDaniels. Come here to Washington. The stadium's in a lousy place. I'm still not going. It takes 3 hours to get out of that stadium out there. So they build the new stadium first. I just think, look, is Robert Kraft going to fire Bill Belichick after getting 6 Super Bowl rings in the middle of a season? Would Belichick take a year off? Ron Rivera, the coach of the Commanders, I think he's a good coach. The team has struggled, without a doubt, but I think he's a good coach. A compelling personal story. So a lot of drama. I do think, I don't know the answer. Is he coming to Washington? I do think the idea that it seems all the smart people up there who cover the team seem to think that this could well be his last season. And that's a big deal.
It is a big deal. Good luck tonight. We'll be watching you, John King. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you very much, John King.
Thanks, John.
We've been speaking with CNN Chief National Correspondent John King, host of All Over the Map, and he will be all over the TV tonight talking about the election results from all around the country. Coming up, Axios Boston and the Wall Street Journal are both reporting that 5 p.m. diners are becoming a thing here in Boston. Usually that would be the joke. It was the early bird special where the grandma and grandpa went for dinner. Well, if you are not yet gray-haired, are you on board for early bird dining as well? And if so, why? You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, streaming at facebook.com/GBH News and youtube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Marge Regan, live at the library, streaming at facebook.com/GBH News, youtube.com/GBH News. With daylight saving setting the sun earlier and earlier, it's miserable. And the persistence of remote work enabling them, Bostonians are apparently booking earlier dinner reservations like 4:30 in the afternoon early. A news story out of Axios tracks a rise in dinner reservations in the 4:30 to 5:30 hour in Boston and several other cities over the past couple of years. Now, in defense of our producer Zoe, who's 30 going on 60 in this regard, and regularly eats dinner well before 5 p.m., nutritional experts do say there are metabolic benefits to eating early, intuitively connecting us to our natural circadian rhythms and allowing time to digest our meals before we go to sleep. I prefer, I don't know, like an 8 p.m. feast. Think red wine, turkey legs, and maybe a side of Nathan's hot dogs for good measure. So are you part of the new wave of young early bird special seekers? Are you a little more European about it, preferring a later meal, good sleep, be damned? 877-301-8970. You know what happened if I ate dinner at 4:30?
What?
I'd have dinner again at 7:30. That's the problem. This early bird thing is ridiculous. Unless you go to bed at like 6 o'clock, who's going to be able to go from 5:15 to 10 or 11 o'clock at night without eating?
I don't know, but apparently it's happened. We mentioned Axios. Our buddy Mike Dean is over there.
Yeah, he is.
Boston Axios. That's a great website, actually. I like that a lot. Yeah. But the Wall Street Journal reporting it, too, that restaurants are closing now earlier all across the country, even in New York City, the city that never sleeps. They're talking about Broadway, people getting their dinner before the show and then going home after the show.
And did you see one famous restaurant in New York used to close at 1 a.m. and now serves its last course at 8:30 p.m.?
Yeah, and the Wall Street Journal quotes this woman who lives in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, and when she was especially you start working from home and she lives alone, she's a single woman. When she got off work, she wanted some conversation with other people, and she would take her Kindle to a local restaurant and she'd eat there, and then she became buddies with the people at the local restaurant. She gets off work at 5 o'clock, and the place she goes to is packed by 6 o'clock. And you know how they used to tell you all the time, if you want to get to a great restaurant that's always really crowded, get there by 5 o'clock? Well, now they're saying it's almost reversed now. Get there at 8:30 and the place is almost empty.
What time do you eat dinner? I don't even know. What time do you eat dinner?
I don't know, whenever I get hungry.
Well, when is that?
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes if I eat a lot after the show, that's it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's it for the night?
Well, if I have to cook for somebody else, then I got to do the dinner thing. But, I eat at different times.
You do?
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you hadn't eaten a lot after the show, what time would you have dinner?
7 o'clock. 7 o'clock.
7, exactly.
Yeah.
That's like civilized.
Yeah, 7 o'clock.
What do you think of Zoe? I don't mean
But
to
you
attack
should be
Zoe.
eating 7 o'clock.
What do you think of Zoe having dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon?
I think whatever Zoe wants to do is absolutely fine with
You don't
me.
really
I think it's
that,
great.
do you?
I think it's great. No, I think she's got it all going.
You don't
whatever
think
she
there's
wants to
something
do.
wrong with her?
Well, I think there's something wrong with you, frankly.
Why is
for having
that?
dinner at 7 o'clock and going to bed at 8:30.
Well, I don't go to bed at 8:30, maybe 8:45. I do. Nothing like going to bed on a full stomach. The number is
Well, that's one of the points they make.
301-8970. Yesterday, remember that first caller yesterday when we were talking about daylight saving time? Was this a construction worker? I think he was.
Yep.
Here's what he had to say.
Well, I'm at work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and at 4:30, 5 o'clock, I'm having dinner and turning in,
What he's probably doing is heating up a can of Chef Boyardee and eating it out of the can. I mean, the notion, it really, by the way, one thing you don't appreciate, I have to say.
What?
You think a meal is a meal. It's not. A meal is an experience.
Okay.
The whole beauty of having a nice meal is it feels good. It's social. It's whatever. You can't have a social experience and a memorable experience at 4:30 in the afternoon.
Okay,
You
well,
just can't.
people are doing it, Jim.
Well,
they talk about these 20-somethings used to these late-night benders. And this is in New York City again. So they found a newfound appreciation for getting a good night's sleep. So they often would meet friends at 9 or 10 on a weeknight, but they don't do that anymore because they didn't get home until 3 o'clock in the morning. And so they've changed that around. And they meet at 5 o'clock, and then they get home like by 10 o'clock, and they find that much more reasonable. And a lot of this has to do with the pandemic, too.
Well, here's what Jamie says, too. Now, this, I understand this, even though I find it unacceptable. I made a 5 p.m. reservation at a fancier than usual restaurant because that's the only time I could get in. Looking at you, we had the owner on the other day. Julia, which is right outside Harvard Square. He also said you can go to the bar. Just go to the bar. You don't need a reservation. So get over it, Jamie. 877-301-8970.
Supposedly changing. The
Yeah,
idea.
but it's not fun. It's not fun to eat dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon.
Okay, Jim.
It's just not.
Well, you know what? You're
What?
the one that's complaining about the change in the time.
I am complaining.
It's dark at 4:30 in the afternoon now, so you can
No, I
fit
understand
it
that.
right in.
Okay,
Patty from Methuen, what do you think?
Hey, Patty.
Hi, long-time listener, sometimes caller.
Good.
Love your show.
Thank you.
My my husband and I are professionals, but my husband should have been a farmer. He wakes up on his own at 5, and at 5 o'clock he's starving.
Really?
So we love going out to dinner at 5 o'clock, and at least before this show, we could usually get a reservation even in a more popular restaurant at 5 o'clock. But we've gone out to dinner at 4 o'clock. We love it. Our ideal Saturday night is when we're home by 8, and we're not that old.
Now, Patty, okay, your husband gets up at 5, so I assume he goes to bed. What time do you get up?
I am, of course, we're opposites. I'm a complete night owl. I crawl out of bed at 8:30 after he brings me coffee.
Okay, so
very
you
nice.
finish dinner with your early bird husband, let's say at 5:45. What do you do about food till you go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night?
Good point. First of all, I tend to be a late night. I tend to eat a huge dinner, so I'm usually okay.
So do I.
I'm usually fine. It's also, going to sleep on a full stomach that can make you uncomfortable sometimes. So we do just fine. Like in Spain, I almost died because, they eat at 10. I almost died.
Patty, tell your husband to get up later. I think that's the solution. Thank you very much for your excellent call. 877-301-8097. Let's play a little Jerry Seinfeld. Eating early isn't for everybody. It's pretty obvious. I can't deal with that. Seinfeld couldn't do it when he visited his retired parents in Florida. Here's a clip from the episode. It was called The Cadillac.
We got to catch the early bird. It's only between 4:30 and 6.
Yeah, they give you a tenderloin, a salad, and a baked potato for $4.95. You know what that costs you after 6?
Can we eat at a decent hour? I'll treat, okay? You're not buying us dinner.
I'm not force-feeding myself a steak at 4:30 to save a couple bucks, I'll tell you that.
By the way, we haven't discussed that. Are the early bird at high-quality restaurants, Jamie, you might know, or the prices aren't any cheaper? It's not like the early bird when we were growing up when our grandparents went out and you had like $4.95 for a steak and a potato or whatever it was. Okay, 877-301-8097.
Didn't you used to talk about something called intermittent fasting?
Yes, I did intermittent fasting. It really worked well for me.
You're joking.
Yeah, I'm joking.
We're getting a lot of texts about that. Here's someone who says, on dinner time, intermittent fasting, proven health benefits and one reason to eat dinner early and not snack afterwards. I'm 47 and eat dinner at about 5:30 on average because this person believes that intermittent fasting. What is intermittent fasting,
I did a fasting thing. I'm not sure it's intermittent, where you stop eating. The last thing you eat is, let's say, at 9 o'clock or 8:30 at night, and you don't eat again the next day till like 11 or something. So it's like half the day or 2/3 of the day. I did it last year or something.
You mean you don't eat for 12 hours?
Or something like that. I don't think 12 hours is matter. You don't eat for some significant amount of time. I think that's what that means.
Somebody else says we don't eat big meals after 4 p.m. It helps with weight control and metabolism. And then somebody else says if you go out to dinner after 8 p.m., they're putting up the chairs all around you in the restaurant.
Yeah, that's horrible too.
Yeah, that is horrible.
You hate that?
Rick from Westboro, what do you think, Rick?
Rick, hello.
Hi, how are you? It's Rick from Shrewsbury, but anyway.
Close enough. Hi, Rick. Welcome.
Big fan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The method behind our madness is that we eat earlier, so romantic time later on is a lot more fun instead of feeling like beached whales in bed.
Now that actually is the first good argument that's been made.
That's a good one.
That is a very good one.
Or, Rick, you could be romantic before dinner. How about that?
No, that's the appetizer. But after dinner, it's nice to go for a nice walk in Boston, have a glass of wine, and then we make our way home, and it's romantic time.
You know how to live, my friend.
Absolutely.
Rick, that was an excellent. But the beach whale, Rick, thank you for the call. The beach whale thing, that is a problem. When you do stuff yourself, right, before you go to bed, you lie down and you almost can't move. Do you know that feeling, Marjorie?
Yes, I do know that feeling.
I doubt that.
Judy from Jamaica Plain says she does eat early because she has acid reflux. And she needs 5 hours of digesting before she lies down to sleep.
Let's not read that.
Well, that's what she
now,
said.
Nicole,
I already read it.
Now, Nicole is relatively young. Young, one of our colleagues, correct?
Yes, she
I
is.
am shocked that I agree with Jim, she says. Well, that's nice. I don't have early dinners because that increases the likelihood of me having a lot of ice cream at 7 p.m. That's exactly one of my fine points, I should say. Thank you for that, Nicole. 877-301-8897. By the way, there's certain things that just don't feel right. And the notion that you would go into a restaurant
who is really
at 4:30.
into restaurants.
I am.
mean, you told me the other day you go out almost every Saturday night for dinner.
I do.
And you make your reservations way in advance.
Yeah.
So you're really into this whole thing. I mean, you're really into food, Jim.
You know what I like?
Let's face it.
I have to tell the truth. I tried a few weeks ago on Saturday nights making a reservation for dinner at 3. So you get home by 4:15, in bed by 5 before the sun goes down. That was before daylight saving, and you're out. By the way, this is an AI. I don't know who, the AI that you've been using since you got back from Italy.
You, hubba.
I look
Jim has
1,000
improved
times
dramatically.
better. I don't know what happened while you were away.
You got to be able to put these things.
This is Jim having dinner at 4:30. Two things are interesting. One, he is really good looking.
Yes.
And two, unlike me, he actually has biceps.
He has biceps.
Which is really
He's
pretty
in a
incredible.
sleeveless shirt.
He is looking pretty good, that guy. 4:30.
877-321-8970 is the number. Let's go
Zoe said are both plates for him. Actually, they might be. Go ahead. Let's go to Julia. Where are we going?
Julia in Arlington.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, how are you?
Excellent.
So here's my point. I think it gives a nice opportunity for an extended dining experience, starting with appetizers and drinks at 4:35, and moving into dinner closer to 6, and heading out, around 7 or after 7. I don't think anyone's forcing us out anymore with the 2-hour limits that were around in the pandemic, and it really lets you pace your meal and enjoy the space.
Can I tell you something?
We got thrown out of a restaurant.
I was just going to say, we're not going to say the name of the restaurant because it's new and they're nice people. Jared and Margie and I went out to dinner to celebrate his new show about 2 weeks ago, and we got kicked out. Because we were sitting, I mean, they politely kicked, well, you can't politely kick somebody out. They basically said, your time is up. And we were doing like a 6:30, 7 o'clock meal thing. And Julia's right. Had we gotten there at 4:30, which would have been horrible, we probably could have had a 3.5-hour meal. Julia, that's an excellent point. Sadly, thank you very much for the call.
Paul says the way to fix the early dinner, which leads to a lot of ice cream later potential, is just to have ice cream for dinner.
That's a good point.
That's an idea.
How come you weren't nearly as upset about getting kicked out of the restaurant as I was? You didn't seem fazed by that at all.
I don't remember, Jim. I blocked it out.
You did?
Yes. I'm a millennial, and it's been a running joke that my wife and I eat with the Q-tips. Eating at 5 means you get a great meal, great service, and not too crowded. So, I don't know. Apparently, the 5 o'clock meal is getting more crowded than it used to be. But in any case.
Look at this.
What?
Jamie writes, also as the parent of a 4-year-old, our parting dinner in Italy ran from 8:30. This is what you're supposed to do. 8:30 until midnight. Antipasto, pasta, meat, desserts, coffee. It was a nightmare. My kid fell asleep on the floor of the restaurant. So what? I mean, did he know? He didn't know. What's the big deal? It's fine. That is the way to live. That is the way to live. What city was that in Italy? You have no idea. It doesn't make any sense. He has no idea where he was. Go, okay.
Anne in Situate, what do you think?
Oh, hey, Marjorie.
Hey.
First time, long time.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I often agree totally with Marjorie, but in this case, I was with Jim to a point until my millennial daughter and 2.5-year-old grandson taught me something different.
What's that?
So this 2.5-year-old is very accustomed to three courses, a meal that starts at 5:30, we end at 7:30. He's not annoying in a restaurant.
Wow.
Yeah, I think his parents have created at least once a week. They like to go out, and we have dinner at 5:30, and then we're home by 7:30, and we can get him down for bed at 8. And then another thing is that we're from a Celtic background, so we often have tea at 10 at night. And so you can supplement that with a little piece of shortbread or something, and you don't go to bed feeling full.
That sounded fabulous, actually, Anne. That was a good one. Thank you very much for the call. A little tea and shortbread a little bit later in the evening. That's great. Wait a second. Is this from your actual meal? Here's a photograph, which, of course, you can't see. These were the cannoli that arrived
Gorgeous.
at 11:30 p.m. on the table, and there are about 14 bottles of beer on the table for the two
Yeah.
of them, too. It's amazing.
A lot of people are asking about seeing the AI images of Jim. We're going to try to straighten
No,
that
they
out.
put a lot of them. They put too many of them, actually, on our Twitter page.
Oh, they do?
They
Okay.
do. It's
All
very
right. Well,
sad.
if you go to the Twitter page and you'll see there Jim in all his glory.
By the way, in all
Now-
fairness, I looked as good as those AI images like 50 years ago, so it's not that inappropriate.
Now, Andy from Yarmouthport says Dr. Oz, of course, he's
Oh,
been
that's somebody I'd be
discredited,
quoting.
by lots of people on various subjects, but perhaps he was right about this.
What'd he say?
Andy from Yarmouthport said Dr. Oz said you should not eat dinner after 7:30 at night. The same metabolic diet reasons that other people have mentioned.
Well, yeah, and by the way, you're going to gain weight. That's the other thing we didn't mention. It's not only better for your system to eat earlier, you gain weight if you eat later because you don't have as much time to work off what you ate. And I know that, and I'm sensitive to my weight. It's such a joy to spend the last part of the evening having a long dinner. I mean, it's just really nice.
If you sit in a restaurant for more than 2.5 hours, you're costing the restaurant and you're serving money. That's the reason why
Well,
they
can I tell you
us.
something? I don't want to, Marjorie's not going to like
Yep.
me saying this. We spent a lot of money at this place. It was
We
a
did.
big celebration.
We
We
did.
did. You were there.
Yep.
It was a big celebration,
celebration
for Jared.
for Jared.
And
Big party.
We spent a lot of money.
Yep.
So that doesn't count.
Okay, went to an upscale restaurant in Hingham last week. The place was empty by 9 o'clock, says Paul.
How is that odd to you?
Well, that's what these stories are saying, that people are eating earlier in general and that restaurants are shutting
I
down
know
earlier
that's
in
what
general.
they say.
I mean, haven't you noticed that when you drive? I mean, we were always notorious here for shutting down early. Boston's
early,
not
yeah.
exactly a late night kind of town.
Well, Mayor Wu's
But
trying to
it's-
change that, actually.
But it's gotten even worse where you go by. I mean, there's a lot of restaurants in my neighborhood. There's one that's open late. And you know
Really?
what?
No.
It's always packed.
Is
You
that
wanna
true?
yes, but if you want to go eat there like at midnight, you can go
Huh.
eat there at midnight. But it's the only one. The rest of them are all closed. The chairs are all up. They're sweeping the floors. Donna from Framingham, what do you think, Donna?
Hey, Donna.
I love to eat, just like Jim.
Yeah.
I
There
love
you go.
So I will eat at any time, but I will tell you, here's a story. So I used to giggle at some friends that always had to eat at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm thinking, that's rude. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that's one way to eat. But if I want to sit down like you and Jim and have a nice 2 and 3 hour dinner like you used to at Lockovers, that's the thing to do.
You remember Lockover? That was a great restaurant, wasn't it?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, Donna, thank
Great restaurant. Women had to
stay
enter
there
through a
2
different door. And how many black people did you ever see at Lockovers, by the way?
I was only there twice.
How many did you see?
I don't think I did
None,
see
yeah.
anybody.
Workers, essentially.
Yeah.
But it was a famous Boston whatever. Donna, thank you for your support for my late dinner thing here.
Mish wants to know if you're going to eat dinner at 5 in Boston, what time do you catch the tea? At 2?
Okay, let's go to Jackie in Seekonk. Hi, Jackie. What's going on?
Hi. First of all, I'm a real fan of the show.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm positively geriatric about eating early.
You are?
Like the latest is 6 p.m.
Why?
I'm just really uncomfortable. It's just not good to eat late at night. And I meet a friend maybe once a month. We get there at 4.
Oh.
We eat dinner. Then we nurse a drink till the place closes.
Wait, when does it close? 5?
10.
Wait a second. You have dinner at 4 and you're there till 10?
Yes.
Well, that's fine. That's exactly what I don't care when you start.
Do you have the drink at the bar or do you sit at your table till 10, Jackie?
Oh, we sit at a table.
And they don't mind?
And they don't mind.
Wow.
Well, we're really good tippers.
Oh, good. Okay.
Well, we were really good tippers, too. We got kicked out.
We spend a fair amount of time in Europe, and we're considered barbaric in Europe.
What, for starting so early?
Yeah.
Because it is barbaric. But the fact that you stay late suggests you actually understand the beauty of the late night at the restaurant or at your dining room table at home kind of thing. So I'm with you. Jackie, thank you for your call. That was excellent.
We have a lot of intermittent fasters here. I guess it's really caught on as a
Maybe we
trend,
should do,
Jim.
can we get somebody on an intermittent fasting and talk about it on the
Yeah.
phone?
How long did you intermittently fast?
I think I lasted at least a day. No, actually, I did it for like a week.
Now, Jody from Denham is
I
saying
think I do.
calories a calorie, input, output. So enjoy and eat whenever you like.
No, that's ridiculous.
That's
ridiculous, yes.
Okay.
Because you also work off calories, and if all you do, as that caller said, is become a beach whale right after dinner, you're not working off of anything. So that's an argument against my position. By the way, the show's over. You aware of that?
Yeah, lots of people blame this on the pandemic.
They are?
Yes, everything changed during the pandemic. People early to bed, early to rise, and eating at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Anyway, we are done for today, as Jim just said. You can keep up with us 24/7 by way of our podcast called, of course, Boston Public Radio. Tomorrow we're going to be joined by Howard Friedman. He's the lawyer that knows everything there is about police conduct and in Boston, and we're going to talk to him about that.
He's represented a lot of clients against the police officers who have engaged in alleged misconduct.
We're going to be joined as well by the Jewish leaders of If Not Now Boston on their hope for justice in Palestine and peace in the Middle East. Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Young is going to be with us, GBH Executive Arts Editor Jared Bowen, media maven Sue O'Connell as well, our crew, Zoe Matthews, Aidan Conley, Nicole Garcia, Hannah Loss. Our engineer is John the Claw Parker. Our executive producer is Jane Bologna. Special thanks to the BPL team, Steve Baracci, Sandra Lopez-Burke, and Hannah McGoldrick. I'm Marjorie Egan.
And thank you all for coming.
Oh,
and by the way,
thank you for coming down to the Boston Public Library.
Who wrote, Jamie? Jim, I remember that week. It was terrible for the staff when I was on a minute. Who wrote that? You? Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I'll remember that.
He was even
Thank you
crabbier than usual. That's right. I blocked that out, too. Blocked it right out.
Because how can you tell the difference, right? Thanks, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.